Good evening and welcome to the Economic Development Committee meeting for February 25th, 2021. Tonight in attendance, we have Councilors Fleming, DiNatale, Squalia, and myself, Van Hazinga. We have one item on the agenda tonight. It's to continue our discussion about the Phase 2 Bundle 3 proposed zoning amendments. So with that, I will turn it over to our Community Development Director, Mr. Tom Skrowski.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. No matter how many times I do this, that's going to keep happening. Good evening, councilors. Good evening, members of the public. For those of you who could not join us yesterday, in our first meeting for Phase 2, Bundle 3, we took on multifamily development, signage amendments, site plan review, and earth removal amendments. And this evening, we'll be taking on the remainder of the bundle, which is the adaptive industrial district, the commercial recreation district, the dimensional table, the table of dimensional regulations, and the table of use regulations. And then finally, we'll take a look at the zoning map itself, which really governs where and what types of development can happen in the city, and then close things off with a pretty simple, hopefully, vote to remove our overlay districts, which is just sort of a formal vote to confirm the map decisions. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. Thank you for bearing with me. Can everybody see the PowerPoint on the screen now?
Yes, thank you, Tom.
Okay, great. The adaptive industrial district is the first item on the agenda tonight. And this really replaces a pre-existing district that we had known as the Mill Conversion Overlay District. And an overlay district is basically, a district that's drawn on top of an existing zoning district. It was a really useful designation, a useful tool, because it provided flexibility for developers, particularly in aging mill buildings, to do things above and beyond sort of traditional industrial activities. But it also gave them the flexibility to continue to develop industrially if the market called for it. The main problem with that existing overlay district is overlays by nature, they're not a core part of the underlying zoning map. And indeed, if you look at our tax map today, our existing zoning, no one here could tell just by looking at that map which parcels were a part of the mill conversion overlay. So although it was a useful tool, it was rarely utilized by developers. And it's really, with the adaptive industrial district, we're trying to do much of the same, targeting aging mill buildings, brownfield sites, which are sites with significant contamination, and parcels around those that sort of have a historic industrial heritage. And the way that this district would essentially work is properties can elect to either retain their traditional industrial rights. So were you to look at the use table or the dimensional table, anything that says industrial, you could still do in an adaptive industrial parcel. And same with the dimensional table. The key difference here is if you want to do something different, you can gain added flexibility through a special permit from the planning board. And I'm going to go ahead and now open up and I know I'm frozen at the moment, but I'm going to pull up the adaptive industrial amendment and walk through it. One change from yesterday, I actually had put forward all of the proposed amendments as we discussed yesterday, and we kind of had them on a split screen. Honestly, it was a bit difficult for me to make sure that we were capturing all the changes, and hopefully now that you all can see it on full screen, it's a little bit easier to understand what's going on. So I'm going to start by looking at no markup without those changes included. I'm sorry, the original version without those changes. So the adaptive industrial districts intended to address, this basically gets into the whole purpose statement as to what we're doing here. It's lengthy, it's verbose, and then it includes 4 bullet items below. Now, if you look at the first amendment that was proposed by Councilor Zarella, it proposes to remove the flowery language entirely, both here and here. And as a practical matter, it doesn't change anything about the district. It makes it a shorter ordinance, and it makes it really clear and to the point that the purpose is right here: to create a district to promote the adaptive reuse of Fitchburg's historic mills, warehouses, brownfields, and previously developed properties while preserving the character of the property in nearby residential and commercial neighborhoods. So that was the first and second amendment. So I suppose I'll pause right there.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on that change?
No, I'll move to approve the amendments.
Do I have a second?
Had to unmute. I'll second.
Thank you very much. And if there isn't any opposition, I'll take it by unanimous consent. All right, thank you very much.
Great. So the next section is actually another proposed amendment. So if we look at the original, it goes from purpose right into definitions, and then actually further down, we get this statement: procedures for adoption of a zoning district map amendment. And the third proposed change, or, I guess depends how, it's proposed amendment number 6 in your document. It proposes taking that item out and essentially moving it further up in the document. This basically said, if you want to have a parcel added to the district, you need to follow our zoning, the 40A laws, to make it part of our ordinance, which is actually kind of a pointless statement, because if anyone wanted to add a parcel to any district throughout the city, they would need to follow the process for getting a zoning amendment adopted, which is to submit a petition, have it go to planning board, and then have it, planning board submit their recommendations to the council, and then the votes are taken by the council. That's really all this was saying. But Councilor Zarella's proposed amendment suggested if we put it here, it might be more appropriate, instead of saying, here's how to add properties to the zoning ordinance by a change that could happen anywhere anywhere throughout the ordinance. It just says, here are the types of properties that might be eligible. Mill or similar properties which lie vacant or underutilized, properties whose floor plates and building layouts were driven by technology no longer needed, and so on and so forth. Basically the same concept as the purpose statement, but gets into a little bit more detail about what types of properties are part of this district.
Tom, just to interject, we have a question from Ms. Karen, the planning board chair. Will the AI district be added under 181.2 districts?
Yes, and that is one of those changes we can make subsequent to all of the votes being taken, and that's really part of. We could probably put a fine point on it and say we should add it, and the same will go for our next conversation with commercial recreation. But it'll also be part of the changes after all of our conceptual votes are taken, and then it gets turned into an ordinance and submitted for a reading. Those type of numbering and formatting changes would happen as well. But we can go ahead and add that up here if that's appropriate. And it's not, it just basically creates consistency within the ordinance.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. This proposal, okay, I see you scrolled down. So it's basically just scratching the 181.689 and rewriting it in a higher up in the zoning, right?
Correct. And it takes out the language that says, here's how you get a property added to the district, because that's how you would add a property to any district.
Okay, but nothing substantive in the bullet points. Still mentions the brownfield and properties which preceded.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. I'm fine with that. I'll The statement used for the language in the section.
All right, so I think we can keep moving. I think for the case of expediency, we won't take a vote on every matter unless somebody is in opposition to a proposed change. Then we can take a vote then. So if nobody opposes, let's just keep moving through and we'll take a motion and vote at the end of the section, if that's all right.
Okay.
The next proposed amendment was to remove adaptive from the definition of an adaptive reuse project. It just felt a bit redundant as proposed by Councilor Zarella. So it doesn't change anything substantive of the definition.
Okay.
Proposed amendment 4 rewrites section 181.683. And again, this is really just a more concise and perhaps legally consistent definition of the district, but doesn't change anything of substance. What it states exactly is that a property can either elect to choose to become an AI property and take advantage of the special permit flexibility, or it can remain utilizing its existing industrial rights.
All right, any questions on this section?
Oh, 1 second. Okay.
And then I guess going forward, it just mentions that if you use it, a special permit's required from the planning board. And it further lays out sort of what should be submitted to the planning board and what should be submitted in addition to a standard special permit application. So for example, if it's a condominium development, any sort of HOA documents for approval, and then copies of any covenants, easements, or restrictions that are proposed to be granted to the city, Conservation Commission, utilities, etc. Standards, and just this lays out further kind of what would be an eligible project: adequate roadways, sufficient parking, sufficient loading, sufficient access to municipal water and sewer. Buildings may be expanded if it's decided that it would be necessary and consistent with the character and scale of the building. And new buildings would be allowed if the board approves of the style. And new buildings, are to be permitted to the extent reasonably necessary to accommodate the proposed adaptive reuse project. Number of dwelling units, it really just lays out the considerations the board should make in determining the number of dwelling units for a given project. And then
I have a
states,
question on that.
yes, of course.
With the number of bedrooms, the planning board may ensure the diversification of dwelling units within an ARP by establishing the number of dwelling units with 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. What is the kind of criteria the planning board would be using as a diversification criteria?
So, I think the criteria would, and Paula, Karen, you can feel free to jump in because I believe this is sort of adapted from the mill conversion overlay. But looking at the existing sort of considerations that the board should be making based on the number of dwelling units, a great example would be if a property only has 50 parking spaces and they want to propose 50 3-bedroom units, the board might suggest they should have 50 1-bedroom units, because a 1-bedroom unit, as we sort of discussed yesterday, is less likely to have significant parking considerations associated with it. I think that's a key one. And certainly that would then follow with trip generation and traffic safety, right? So the more bedrooms you have, the more traffic issues you might have in, particular locations. So I think it's a site-specific consideration where one might want to, take into account those factors.
So parking is a criteria. are there any other general criteria that are used for ensuring diversification?
The criteria is all here in 6887. But then it is sort of a broader statement if sort of associated with the diversification piece itself is not defined in any way.
It feels kind of arbitrary. Okay.
I guess since we have our planning board chair here, Ms. Karen, do you have any thoughts on this section?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
As Tom mentioned, that is where we see like in the smart growth areas, and we also have projects that seem to be more market driven. Others where it potentially is more for affordable housing, and some diversification in other types of projects we see, maybe not just, you know, multifamily, but planned unit developments, and others where there's a mixed is trying to also ensure there's like single floor living in some cases and handicap accessibility. Seeing this, you know, a desire for that. Oftentimes though, it, you know, doesn't fit into the, you know, financial benefit of the contractor, because this takes up more floor space in order to do like a, you know, ground floor versus going up with bedrooms and things of that nature. But we try to ensure some of those projects have those aspects in it. So it does depend on like the location and aspects too, but we hopefully, you know, still try to, you know, put in some direction about aging, accessibility, and other matters for diversification.
I will say sometimes there is, or there's pressure on developers as they try to make a project feasible and make the numbers work, to increase the number of smaller apartments that they have in the development, because the total rent that can be generated from 100 one-bedroom units can be, you know, greater than if it's broken into a smaller number with some larger units. But at the end of it, if you have, say, 100-unit development in an old mill building, you don't necessarily want 100 one-bedroom apartments, because these tenants tend to be more transient, don't last as long, maybe there for a limited period of time. We have a lot of turnover, and I think it is important as a city that we encourage a mix of housing types and sizes to cater to different segments of our city. And I think in the long run, it makes projects better and more successful, because they can appeal to many different types of renters, or if it's condos, buyers. So I think this is a good thing for the planning board to have some ability to encourage diversification within these developments.
Because this is looking at like the number of dwelling units, other aspect. I mean, it mostly reads, as you surmised, like to the infrastructure of it, you know, how can it support it? But there's also like either community need or other desires of the community, you know, towards that, you know, we want to ensure that there's more emphasis on XYZ. Because, I mean, that says character of existing buildings, but could also put in something about, I mean, this section is just number of dwelling units, whether it's here or another part of it, that it's also about considering about the needs of the community and or that specific neighborhood. For when we say number of dwelling units, it's also like accessible. Maybe accessibility too.
Yeah, is accessibility noted that the planning board may ensure diversification through accessible apartments? Is that noted anywhere, or is that something that maybe we can add? Because that's not that is not listed in this this section, because this is number of dwelling units. But
I believe that would be something that would be influenced by the American with Disabilities Act for projects over a certain size. So it's something that's typically addressed. I don't think it's something we really need to require in the zoning ordinance, but it's something that builders already have to factor into their design.
Okay.
So it affords the board discretion, which can be helpful for, you know, and I think they're pretty well versed in looking at the circumstances and making some judgment calls based on those.
okay.
All right, actions by the planning board. It basically states how, what findings the board could make based off of the circumstances. And these are sort of the criteria that they could find that a project is not detrimental to the neighborhood. These are also criteria they could utilize to have that same determination of sort of dwelling units as discussed before. And then it notes, and this is sort of standard language for a lot of sections within the ordinance, that the board may impose conditions based off of, including but not limited to the following things. And this is the item that we removed and moved up. And then it basically suggests that we amend the table of use regulations by adding this column. What I would recommend is that we look at this section with the whole table of use regulations. It would be more appropriate, I think, to view it within context.
I don't see a table. I don't know if your screen is paused.
Oh, it must be paused. I'm sorry. So yeah, this is everything I just reviewed. Actions by the planning board, findings, conditions, the area we removed, and then it suggests adding this table. One of the items we note with a footnote is that properties in the AI district may elect to default to the provisions of the industrial district, as mentioned before. We could certainly go through these now. It would be my recommendation that we pause and look at it with the full table later this evening.
I think that's a good idea.
Why later?
A lot of the questions that you might have might be better explained looking at how they relate to how we regulate this use in other districts. But we could certainly go through them now. That's just my personal kind of going through this over the last few months and year. Really, is it's always easier to look at it in a context. And we had the same discussion with the planning board, and they often would make changes. And actually, here's the other thing. I want to make sure whatever changes you make here make their way to the final table. And that's the best way to ensure it happens. Although I promise I'm doing my best to try to keep records. There's just a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, so I think that's the best idea. So why don't we, this is the end of the district, this segment, right?
Correct.
So why don't we consider all the changes prior to the table? And if I have a motion to accept them, we can get this section done. We'll move on to the next, and we will, when we go through the entire table, consider these items in the table of uses.
I would just like to, I just have a couple questions just to bring up for thoughts on this table, and we won't change it. How about we not change anything on the table until later? But I'd just like to throw out a few questions.
Sure.
Okay. Why not a lodging house in the adaptive industrial? Why not a motor vehicle storage or display of vehicles? Because I know that a couple of mill buildings that we have do store vehicles on multiple floors.
Councilor Scully, I think as Tom mentioned, it would be helpful to have this discussion when we also have the industrial district and the other districts next to it, so we can see how the approved or disapproved uses in this district compared to other areas. And I think that will help the conversation.
Well, and because the second one, the motor vehicle storage, I think that's allowed in the industrial district. So if we saw it as an N here, but it was allowed in the industrial district, any property in the AI could still do motor vehicle storage. It just would be by using the traditional rights they have. So an AI district basically has two sets of rights, either I or AI in the use table.
So I think that's important to consider, and we can have a more meaningful conversation if we consider this as part of the entire table and we can see the other uses. So would anybody be willing to approve the proposed changes prior to the table of uses?
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Is anyone opposed? All right, we'll take that by unanimous consent. And we will come back to the table of uses in the table of uses section, and we can address these items and have a better discussion, I believe.
Okay. Next up, we'll be looking at the Commercial Recreation District. This is a new district proposed for parcel off of Game On Way, which is currently zoned rural residential with a commercial recreation overlay. And Great Wolf Lodge, this was based off of planning board recommendation, which is currently zoned industrial, which makes no sense. So the statement is to encourage facilities that are important for the growth and sustainability of team sports and promote recreation sports and supported activities for not only citizens of Fitchburg, but also for communities throughout our region that provide an opportunity for added community and family-based tourism in the city. I might add, this is another set of flowery recommendations that was proposed to be cut as the First Amendment, but we'll let you all make that determination. And great. So it first proposes we delete the Westminster Hill Road Commercial Recreation Overlay District in its entirety, and then add the following in the business district. And again, you can see the original statement is here. The First Amendment in front of you this evening proposes removing that and adding a shorter statement to promote the development of facilities which support and facilitate team sports and other large-scale recreational activities, especially those which are suitable to attracting tourism. That was an amendment proposed by Councilor Zarella. If I may humbly suggest that we consider adding and supporting and complementary uses and activities to promote, so it's not so sort of narrowly focused.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that as well. And I will make an important note that a lot of these proposed edits have originally come from Councilor Zarella, but I've talked them over with him in detail, and I am actually proposing these amendments on his behalf because he is not a member of this committee. So technically, they're coming from me.
Okay, thank you.
On behalf of
clarification. The second proposed amendment, and this we could also cover in the use table, frankly. It would be to remove single-family dwellings as an acceptable use.
Why was that there?
I think because the district had some of the areas around it are single-family uses, but I don't think there's any practical reason for it to be there. That I think it's pretty logical. And retail stores, and I'm sorry, I know we're sort of now looking at the use table, sort of contradicting my previous statement, but these amendments are written into this one. Retail stores and services not otherwise set forth is planning board as opposed to no. And then artisan manufacturing, the third proposed amendment to the use table would be planning board as opposed to a no. And that is something that you all had approved the use in bundle 2, but we obviously didn't have the commercial recreation district yet.
Restaurant fast food? Is there, I mean, technically at Great Wolf Lodge, there's a Dunkin' Donuts. Is that not a restaurant fast food?
I'll get to that in a moment. I'll go there now. I think that's a useful discussion to have. So we would also add a new section in commercial recreation accessory uses. So accessory uses such as dining for users of the facility, parking, gift shop, pro shop, medical offices, daycare, solar or wind power generation for the primary use of the commercial recreation facility, and any other use that's compatible with the permitted use. So that would be an accessory use to Great Wolf, and so then would be permitted. And then it lays out the table of dimensional regulations, and then further add some flexibility therein. This is one, essentially it adds flexibility that I think would be useful to discuss in the dimensional regulations again, because there's actually a further amendment that makes sense when looked within the full context of the regulation. So I might suggest that we leave this out for now, but otherwise, the basic concept is here would be the dimensional regulations for this district, and the district would then get height and dimensional exceptions allowed. I guess I'll pause there for a moment.
Yes, I believe the discussion, and there's not a specific change to the proposal before us, but it's just a discussion of should we have any language establishing hard limits to how much of an exception can be made. And I think that's kind of the hope to maybe see if we can come up with what the right fit is there, because we don't want to be too restrictive, but there is the concern we don't want to have it too wide open to be anything. But we do want to preserve the flexibility because we don't necessarily know what may be needed in terms of building height. Say a climbing facility would come in, maybe that would require a taller building than would be envisioned otherwise, or something to the effect that we just don't know about right now. So I think that's something we can tackle in the future.
And the one thing I would say about even taking this whole 5 and 6 on when we get to dimensional regulations, a reason it would be useful to do, it's hard to look at these numbers in isolation without comparing, like, what is the maximum height limit in the residential districts? What is it in the commercial district? What is it in downtown? And I think that might be useful here. So you all could make the determination if these numbers seem right.
So
Before we go there, I just have a question.
Sure.
So these are the limits of the height in the lot area, but then we're saying that if you want to build a taller building, then you can get planning board special permit approval. That's
correct. Exactly. For height and other dimensional
and
exceptions.
Griffin has suggesting maybe we have a limit to that in the ordinance.
Correct. So, and actually there is within the ordinance today. And that's why, basically there's a subsection of, it's like 181.4281, let's say, I don't know what the exact citation, that says that they can waive the size or the height requirement from 36 up to 60, I want to say 60 feet. So it does set parameters. We also have a case in the industrial district where a special permit's allowed with no height limit whatsoever. And that's today, that's not new, that's our existing ordinance. But I think the thought process was if we do not allow for sort of a upper end height limit, are we basically just saying that this is a variance that the planning board can grant by special permit instead? Because there's really two forms of relief. You can get a special permit that says this is something you can do, or you can get a variance that says this is something you can't do, but maybe the board will approve it. So what's being suggested here is we should make it look more like a special permit and less like a variance.
Like that, I 36 feet seems a little short for the proposals for commercial recreation. So as long as there's a special permit that they can apply for to go higher, then I like that. Okay, thank you.
Are we all set with commercial recreation then?
yeah, and I think so. And just to note, Tom, all the uses that are allowed in this district, are they primarily by special permit already? Is that correct?
Yeah, the vast majority of them, the uses we see here are kind of exempt uses that are yes, and similar municipal facilities and all the exempt uses in section B. Those are things we can't say no to. So you can't put no, and you can't put planning board because they're exempt uses by definition.
So any of the likely developments of new commercial recreational facilities will have to go through the special permit process already. So
Correct.
it's not requiring another level of scrutiny to any development. It's just allowing more flexibility as it goes through that process.
Correct.
All right.
Mr.
Thank you
Chairman,
very much.
I have a question,
Yes, Councilor D'Antelli.
just a general one. Tom, when we had the game on debate years ago, there was confusion or puzzlement by some councilors about how there is a residential development next to an industrial park.
Hmm.
I don't know what geniuses thought that up when that occurred, but I know the backstory, but apparently it was our predecessors on the council at that time. But I'm asking, is this revamp going to prevent that from happening again, where we're going to have, I haven't looked closely at the map in that area, but we're not allowing for any residential development up there, are we, in that area?
So there is, all of the residential uses are an N.
Okay.
So
So,
no.
but they're not bordering the district though, right? I mean, my concern is proximity to this district because it's more rural out there, and I just want to avoid another game on issue, where we park houses like right next to a boundary where there's a commercial district.
Right. And just to be clear, and we'll look at it in a moment, but this is basically proposed to be the parcels that are game on today. And then the parcel that is Great Wolf, essentially.
That's basically it.
Right. I mean, that is it. Correct.
I wanted to clarify that because I had some people in Ward 3 ask me that question about, is this allow for another game on to, or better yet, does this allow for another housing development up there that would then border another game on or another development? It just seems to me like in these areas, there shouldn't be any more houses.
Correct. And it allows for commercial uses, but not residential.
Okay.
And not particularly now if A1 single family, which I think was just an oversight, is turned to an L.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. So would anyone like to make a motion to approve the proposed changes to this section?
So move.
All right, a motion. Do I have a second?
Okay,
Is there any opposition? All right, it goes by unanimous consent. We can move on.
Okay, dimensional regulations regulates the physical character of development in each district, like lot sizes, like frontage, etc. I did note, most of the changes were already sort of pre-approved in previous votes. So for example, the board already voted, or I'm sorry, the council already voted to combine RA1 and RA2. The council had just voted to add CR, although we'll be talking about it in more detail. And in bundle 2, the council also voted to make those RC changes in that most dense residential district. One thing I did want to note is the changes you voted on in bundle 2 weren't reflected in the prep document that you received. So I have called out what the actual vote that you made in bundle 2 would be, and the document we will look at will be amended to reflect that. Is RC was, there's RC infill and there's RC non-infill, and the RC non-infill had a lower lot size, lower frontage, front yard, side yard, rear yard than is called out in the prep materials you received. But again, it's consistent with the votes that you all made in the second bundle. That was just a typo on my part. And we will review the document in detail. I just wanted to make that clear to you all up front. And then there's a few additional changes we'll be looking at, a section that allows for commercial district flexibility on dimensionals, the commercial recreation exception, and minimum lot size for car sales. And this is actually based off of a petition brought forth by Councilor Boschman. A few months back, it went to Legislative Affairs and I think Economic Development, maybe Public Safety, that suggested that auto sales should have minimum lot sizes, so you don't have somebody selling cars on a 500 square foot property, or I think, and it was suggested that there should be a minimum car requirement of 10 cars. We sort of, in zoning speak, we took that and turned it into a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet, which is basically one conforming single family lot. And again, we'll look at it in detail. I just wanted to give you all a heads up on those key changes. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this off track changes. It's a bit convoluted to look at otherwise. This would be the table as it would look. Again, as I mentioned, RC non-single family and RC single family. Though that's a vote you all took in bundle 2. Nothing has changed on any of these in terms of planning board recommendations. One thing that I did want to bring up, this was really the one key planning board decision that was made in bundle 3, aside from recommending CR, is that they, originally a lot of the districts that are zoned commercial were once CBD, commercial business district. And all of those originally had no maximum height requirement. By classifying into a commercial district, there's now a maximum height requirement of 40 feet. That's just pre-existing. And the planning board felt like it was probably appropriate to raise that figure to a higher number, perhaps not unlimited like in the downtown, but they were not sure which way to go. I think the number they actually settled on was 50, but it was really more of a statement of, we think that we should have more flexibility in this district. And it was a suggestion they were posing to the council. Now I could certainly add 50 here. And the other sort of associated change with it is we added a height exception in commercial, adaptive industrial, and industrial districts. So if you look at the original zoning, 181.426 is pre-existing. It was called height exceptions in industrial districts. This would simply add commercial and adaptive industrial to it. And it would basically, here's how it currently reads. Here's how it would read in the amended version. That would just state that structures in the commercial AI and I districts may exceed the stated maximum height with the issuance of a special permit from the applicable special permit granting authority, either planning board or the ZBA. If they make a finding that additional height is necessary to accomplish the intended purpose of the structure and is not injurious to the surrounding uses.
Yeah, I have a question on this.
Mm-hmm.
So commercial and commercial recreation, commercial recreation is a lot more restrictive. Why is that? What was the thought process behind that?
So I think the thought process is that we have the primary developments in each, Great Wolf and Game On. They're already going to, they've been permitted and developed at this point. So the bulk of the development is taking place. It's pre-existing non-conforming. But to be quite honest, it was also a starting point for discussion because it's a brand new district. I think that a good argument could be made in the commercial recreation district to raise the limits, frankly. But, given that you are kind of surrounding a residential neighborhood in Game On, you could also make the argument that there is a need for some degree of setback requirements. But I do, 36 feet is, the lowest maximum height of any of our residential districts. So it's not significant. You couldn't propose a building of significant scale currently, although that exception exists that we'll talk about in a moment. So one could make the argument that the exception is enough and that the baseline figure doesn't matter. because all of the projects would be going in front of the planning board anyway. But I think you could also make a reasonable argument to raise the height limit a bit and still allow for an exception to raise it further. Just my 2 cents.
I would like to propose that we raise the height limit for both commercial and commercial recreation. Industrial is at 75 feet, and with the allowance of a waiver, that seems very reasonable. But I don't see why commercial recreation should be 4 foot lower than 40, and 40 also is only, less than 4 floors height for a building. And I don't see why we need to limit that for commercial or commercial recreation. So I like 50 feet for both. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are.
I would agree. I do think 30 feet or 36 feet, 40 feet is a little low. I don't have a problem with 50 feet. I think that allows for 4 stories with a little cushion.
No objection.
Okay, what, Councilor Untitled?
No objection.
Oh, no objection, I'm sorry.
I don't understand why there's a difference. There hasn't been any concrete reason for one. So.
Okay. Then to go down to these exceptions, basically the exception for C, AI, and industrial does not indicate any sort of maximum height limit that could be accepted. When you get down to the second section, what was once height and dimensional exceptions in FSU district, I propose to just merge the CR and FSU. So just to be clear, this is my proposal, not the planning board's, but the planning board approved of height and dimensional exceptions in the CR district. It's functionally identical to height and dimensional exceptions in the FSU district. So I therefore propose merging them just for consistency. And then it just, any case it said FSU, it now says FSU or CR district. And then the difference here, as opposed to 181.426, where the height limit is unlimited, here it says, basically a front setback of less than 15 feet and a height greater than 36, but no more than 60. So 60 would be the upper limit. Obviously, if you all had just proposed 50, that basically allows for a 10-foot variance.
I would say that I think we need to set the higher limit a little higher. I think 60 feet is not necessarily that tall when we look at some of the structures we could have in these areas. Just thinking of the existing hotel at Great Wolf, I believe that's over 60 feet. Thinking of the existing dorms at Fitchburg State, some of those are over 60 feet. I think that's a little conservative, especially when it's an upper limit and the planning board still has discretion to say something is too tall. It doesn't automatically have to go to the upper limit. So I think that number should really reflect an upper limit.
I agree completely. Where does it say that there's an upper limit?
Am I unpaused here?
Yes. So at the end of that last point, 181.4273, it says, but no more than 60 feet. So I think if we're going to have that upper limit there, we need to make it higher.
I would say we do not have an upper limit because, like you said, right now, both the CR and the FSU have existing buildings that are taller than 60 feet. And I see no problem with that if they want to build another dorm, or if Great Wolf Lodge needs to build an addition with more rooms. I don't see why there should be a limit at all.
And I certainly think there should be some discretion available to the board to make sure that any use that is applying for this variance is conforming with surrounding uses and works for the city and for the neighborhood. But like you said, there are existing buildings that work perfectly fine, and I could see more coming in these areas that would work perfectly fine too, that would exceed 60 feet. So I guess the question is, do we want to put a number in there? I know Councilor Zarella has advocated for some sort of limit in the past. Do you think should we do that? Should we leave it open-ended?
Could it not be up to the discretion of the board? I know we want to maybe talk about a limit, but I mean, it sounds to me like there are case-by-case bases on this regard that, may warrant a higher structure, a taller structure, and where there wouldn't be a taller structure. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe leave it open-ended and subject to the discretion of the board's requirements. I mean, I just don't want to hamstring us into setting a limit that may prevent certain types of development that are unnecessary of preventing.
Councilor, I agree with you. I think there is the planning board is often thought of as a permissive board, but a lot of that is a function of the planning board governing uses that are allowable. They aren't the Board of Appeals. It's not that they say yes to everything and the Board of Appeals says no to everything, but they serve different functions. And there is a special permit process, and the planning board has the right and the ability to say no if a project doesn't work, that's requiring for this, or is trying to get this height waiver. So I think the planning board has discretion to say, hey, a 47-unit building, on a lot line directly next to a single family home, maybe that's not a good idea, and we're not going to approve it. They have that ability to say no. So I think that is a check. And it's just because there isn't a hard limit doesn't mean that the planning board can't say no to something that's unreasonable, that doesn't work.
And
So,
just for reference, I do have the list of the criteria. This is sort of like the core criteria the planning board or the ZBA, if issuing a special permit, would need to consider. So they can make a determination based off of these criteria whether or not something would be a good fit. So for example, were you to look at a skyscraper in the middle of a single family housing district, you could make an argument that it does not fit the criteria for a waiver because of it would create traffic chaos, right? There is inadequate likely public services to allow for trash removal, et cetera, and it doesn't fit in with the neighborhood character, and so on and so forth. So I think they can utilize that criteria, utilize their discretion, and make a determination based on their judgment.
So I'd like to move that we remove the upper limit for the height for the commercial, recreation, and FSU.
Second.
all right. So I think if I just may recommend, I think the specific amendment would be to strike everything from 36 feet, but no more than 60 feet. And also replace that 36 feet with 50 feet because we changed that in the previous table.
Okay. And a height greater than, okay.
I guess one question, Tom, is do we need this do we need this last clause here?
Well, there is the front setback piece as well.
Okay, yep. All right.
Yep, the water slide at Great Wolf is 65 feet tall already.
Mike O'Hara, thank you for getting your ruler out.
So I have to ask, Mike, did you climb to the top and put the tape measure down, or?
He works in mysterious ways. Okay, then and I know there are a couple other comments in the chat that we could address in a moment. The other item with motor vehicle sales basically states that motor vehicle and equipment sales shall be located on a lot with at least 10,000 square feet. Again, if there is a car sales lot that exists that's less than 10,000, this doesn't apply. They're grandfathered, but this would be for any future car sales lots.
Do we know how many car sales lots we have approximately that currently don't meet this criteria?
I did not do that analysis. It was, to be frank, it was a judgment call. I was trying to sort of take into account and our team at BSC, I shouldn't just say myself, but we were trying to take into account the sort of 10-car limit that Councilor Boschman had suggested. And if you think, a standard lot size, the minimum in a residential district is about 10,000 square feet. What could you fit in a 10,000 square foot lot? Maybe a little less than 10 cars if you're including other structures and so forth. But
and I think it's important to consider that within that lot for this use, you need space for the cars that are being sold themselves. You also need space for any offices or garage bays or anything like that that's used to fix the cars. You need space for parking for employees, and you need space for visitors to the site, for customers. So I don't think that's unreasonable.
I'm frankly going to vote against this because I have no problem with, a motor vehicle, a motor vehicle repair place. Like, for example, Fitchburg Tire downtown, they'll repair some vehicles and then put 2 or 3 vehicles out for sale in the parking lot. I don't know if they have 10,000 square feet. I know that many of them that exist do not. And I have no problem with a small lot opening up to sell 5 cars, personally. I don't know what everyone else feels, but does this, as it's written, disallow a small motor vehicle repair shop from being able to sell 1 or 2 cars out in front?
Well, so I am getting my oil changed at Viola tomorrow. So I want to be in their good graces as well. I would suggest that this is primarily for principal uses. So if your principal use is to be a motor vehicle and equipment sales, then this would apply. If your principal use would be a motor vehicle repair shop, the dimensional requirements here would not apply.
Also, I will clarify, I just looked it up on the mapping program. Viola's Tires, which does sell a few, I've bought a car there in my past too. It's a repair shop, it's a tire shop, and they sell a few cars. That lot is a shade under 35,000 square feet.
Okay.
So most of these spaces are bigger than 10,000 square feet to begin with. What this is seeking to avoid is the small postage stamp sized car lot that is just crammed to the gills with cars.
So the Viola location was over 30,000, you said?
It's 34,406,000 square feet. I'm sorry, 34,406 square feet.
That is a tiny space for the amount of cars they have there. I mean, every time I've gone there, the lot is full. I know they got the car bays in the building, but so that's a good reference point for a comparison. That the lot we're talking as a minimum would be a third of that.
Correct.
And boy,
smaller than a third.
That is tiny. So I guess my question is, maybe we don't have the answer for this right now, but just out of curiosity, do we have any businesses in the city currently that have this kind of a use that's under 10,000 feet?
Oh, I just looked on the other end of Putnam Street from Viola. There's a used car lot there. It used to be a gas station. That is over 21,000 square feet. Now, if we're looking at a standalone lot, I believe there are some on Water Street near the Happy Car. If you give me a moment, I can look up and see how big that one is.
And again, it is worth noting, if it's an existing business, this wouldn't apply. They would be grandfathered.
Right. So, I mean, I personally am not against the minimum. I guess from the standpoint of any business that's already doing that, and I would like to think it's not many, they're protected from this. And I mean, using a couple of these locations as comparison points and then looking at 10,000, it's like, I never appreciated how small 10,000 is. When you look at a Viola, and that's not a big place, but it's more than triple what the 10,000 minimum is. So some may even argue that 10,000 sounds too small, but I don't really know how much you can do below that. So I don't really know if we're really restricting any abilities here on that front. So I'm okay with the minimum just based on those comparative points. I mean, I'm trying to think off the top of my head places throughout the city that are car dealerships, like the one on the. Did you already mention the one on Water Street before Zeta's with the gas station?
Yeah.
Yes, so that was 21,000 square feet. I'm just about to get another
And then
one.
we have a
for-
couple on River Street.
Yes, there are some on River Street.
What now? The chair, chairwoman Karen asked, is this applicable to just sales or is it also applicable to repairs too? And I'm reading the language and I don't see repairs there. I only see motor vehicle and equipment sales. Would repairs fall under the equipment sales?
It would. So this, the dimensional table, I'm sorry, as defined, that is referring to a principal use, which means that's the main thing they do. So in the case of Viola, again, their principal use would be motor vehicle sales and repair, or I'm sorry, motor vehicle repair. Their accessory use would be motor vehicle sales. And in layman's terms, what that means is they do vehicle repair and occasionally they'll sell a car. It's not their main use and it's an accessory use. And this would be referring to anything whose principal use would be motor vehicle sales.
So we just got a note from Mr. O'Hara that there is a garage that sells cars at 565 River Street by the railroad underpass, and that's about 15,000 square feet. And I just looked up, if you remember, on Water Street next to the Happy Car gas station, there's a used car sales lot, and that is a shade under 16,000 square feet.
So it sounds to me like 10 is fairly reasonable because you're talking still 5,000 or 6,000 feet. Now I know the exact lot on River Street and the other one you mentioned, those are tiny. So I mean, 10 doesn't sound unreasonable considering we have some that are about 5,000 feet above that. Mm-hmm. Unless we have a lot of them, I'm okay with the minimum. I didn't appreciate how small or how big 10,000 was. So, I mean, and then Mary Jo, mentioned that what the aim of the 10,000 minimum was. And, I would agree with that logic. So I would be okay with keeping this in here for myself.
I would agree with you, Counselor.
So a question on the motor vehicle repair as a principal use. So if you can have a motor vehicle repair shop on less than 10,000 square feet as your principal use and sell cars, I mean, what kind of stops you from, if you were originally, most of these car sales have a bay for repairing cars. What would stop them from just saying that's their principal use and selling the cars?
There's always a loophole for everything, to be sure. I think what I would say is what this is going to stop more than anything is the, I guess, theoretical possibility of just selling cars on a lot without anything else taking place. I think if there was motor vehicle repair taking place and they had the facilities for it, that's probably a more productive use of the site than in other cases where conceivably, without this, you could see a vacant lot, 10,000 square feet, pull a bunch of cars in, put signs on them. I think that is maybe the type of use that this would be trying to prevent.
And it's also important to note that motor vehicle sales does require a separate license from the city. So that's another avenue that this can be scrutinized or not, I guess scrutinized is the wrong word, but the veracity of the use can be checked to evaluate whether or not they're trying to get in through a loophole of repair or that's their intended use.
And not to mention the signs they put up for their advertising.
Yep.
Which we covered yesterday, to be sure, yeah. and then some.
Some of the car selling only lots, no repairs, use internet to market the cars, so the lots act like car storage. Yeah.
And that was a concern brought up in our advisory committee as we were building this together.
So I guess, Councilor Squally, you had expressed concern about this. Have they been addressed, or do you still wish to amend the proposed changes?
Well, it sounds like I'm in the minority, so I'll just voice my disapproval with 10,000 square feet.
Duly noted. All right, do we have any other items in this section to address, Tom?
I think we had a few comments come in. I want to make sure we got through them. So one note from Ms. Karen, should there be a footnote or table update in the dimensional table to reference the new AI district? And I think that's probably worth adding. And it's a pretty simple add. What I would suggest is if we have 3, you could always add a 4th asterisk note.
I think you may still be frozen.
Oh, here I am thinking you guys are watching me. Okay. So the asterisk we don't have to write it on the fly necessarily, but properties in the industrial district, or I'm sorry, in the AI district can elect to, it basically mirroring what we had in the use table, can elect to utilize or
Can elect to be subject to?
so it would be unless this is why I don't want to do it right now, but basically unless a property elects to become an AI, it is subject to the dimensional regulations of the I district. If it is electing to become AI, it's subject to the requirements of the planning board special permit, which are not clearly defined dimensional regulations per se.
And that makes sense. And I think we need to be clear that if a property use is going to is allowed in the industrial, and is following that, it needs to follow the industrial dimensional regulations, and vice versa. It can't be in a use allowed, especially in the AI, but then follow industrial dimensional. It has to be consistent across.
So somebody who's looking at the zoning map is going to look here too. But they're going to see AI. They're not going to see I. Not know that it's I. So it was just like, how do you make that reference point? Is it just, or do you do like in the column where it says I, do you put parentheses or AI? It's the same thing. So I don't know, so it's just like somebody wants to see, you want to go here and you see there's an AI district, but you can't find it.
Well, we could certainly just add one that says we could add a row that just has AI in it, and then it could even be NA across the board, and then have that footnote that describes it. So at least people look at it and they see they can do one or the other.
See, well, that's still, I was going to say, it's still confusing because they're looking at AI on the map, and then you look here and it'll say not applicable.
No, that is right. Should we have an AI line in this?
And it should just mirror the I, or do you just say I and then put in, it's I and AI pretty much. It's the same parcel, actually. It's the same zone.
You're suggesting?
Yeah, parentheses, something, it's I or AI. So you go, oh, okay, that's the same thing. I don't know. Think about it, but that's just trying to, help people when you're looking at the map to then go, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Okay, that's what it is. Clearly, these are the dimensions.
If the committee were to make a recommendation that we clarify this on the table, that recommendation could be, taken between now and Tuesday, when this bundle change would have to go into effect as a viewable final document for our March 16th hearing. So we don't necessarily have to vote on the form tonight or the substance tonight, but rather the general concept if you prefer. I could also keep working on this too.
I think let's let's approve the intent and we can figure out how best to do it. Let's give ourselves a little time to make it work best. Is that agreeable to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's more than that.
All right. So I would entertain a motion to accept the proposed zoning changes as amended.
Motion
Second.
with
Motion
changes.
and second. Does anyone oppose? All right, great. We can move forward.
Okay. Next up, we have the use table, which regulates what uses can take place where. The planning board recommendations are in the track changes document. One missing recommendation by the planning board. They had recommended everything in artist live work. A10 is by special permit of the planning board. Anywhere it would state why. So basically anywhere it would be allowed, it would be allowed by planning board, not by right. And then an additional change we can discuss is an agriculture definition per building commissioner and city solicitor recommendation. Councilor Di Natale had mentioned at the previous meeting, he recalled, we are talking about agriculture as having a 5-acre exemption. And Councilor Di Natale had said, well, I'm remembering 2 for some reason. And, I said, well, 5 is sort of, that's the exemption. And I was wrong. 5 is sort of what everyone still kind of thinks about today. And that's the standard exemption across the board. But in 2010, it was actually changed that you can have an agriculture exemption if a property is 2 acres, provided that it's a commercially viable property, that you have gross sales of over $1,000 per acre. So it's not an across the board exemption like 5 acres would be. It's a qualified exemption. But I think that clarification was important. So we'll be looking at a change to the definition there. And thank you, Councilor Di Natale, for noting that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the use table. Okay. So the first thing that is noted as a amendment proposed by Councilor Van Hazinga is an amendment to change the downtown business district abbreviation from DBD to DB, and change the neighborhood business district designation from MBD to MB for consistency in naming with the other districts.
That's fine.
The second proposed amendment is to change multifamily housing from planning board in the RB district to N, where it would not be an allowed use. So, and just to clarify, the residential districts in the city, you have the RC district, which are the kind of residential districts closest to downtown, Lower Cleghorn as well. They're kind of the most dense urban residential districts in the city. Then you have RC is sort of the next concentric circle out, and then RR or RA, and then RR. So this is sort of like an urban district, a dense district, but not as dense as RC, just to clarify.
So we could have 3 families in an RB, but the planning board suggests that we don't even allow by planning board approval 4 or more, or between 4 and 8, right?
So this was a proposal by Councilor Van Hazinga and Zarella. It is worth noting that you could still do a planned unit development. So this would apply to certain, but not all multifamily developments in the RB district. And 4 to 8 units would be a big one, to be sure. I think that would be the primary development that would be affected by this.
So I am putting forward this amendment on behalf of Councilor Zarella for the largely for the sake of consistency between our two hearings, because this will also be held or heard by the Legislative Affairs. So it's here for discussion. We can reject it, we can accept it. Frankly, I could be persuaded either way. I've gone back and forth as I've thought about it. RA districts are primarily single family areas. Not to say that there aren't 2 or 3 family developments, but these are the regions of our city that are a little less dense, that are primarily single family homes. It's not quite rural residential, but it's the sort of the next step. So we could allow multifamily in these areas. We could take a look at the map and you can see where these areas are. We could go with the amendment and not allow it. I think it's open for discussion.
And just to clarify, are we talking about RB or RA?
RA.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm mixing
RB.
it up a little bit. RB.
Yeah.
So RB is a little more dense. It's not quite RC, but it's closer.
Yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't, I mean, considering we adjusted the multifamily housing to be 4 through 8, and kind of on par with a 3-family dwelling, kind of. I don't see why we wouldn't want the planning board to have that leverage or authority to be able to say yes or no. I don't understand why we wouldn't want that.
I think it's fair. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
So we're putting it into RA, you're saying?
No, I'm sorry. My reference to RA was an error. We're
Okay.
looking at whether or not multifamily housing should be allowed with a special permit in the RB district.
And that's how the planning board recommended it. And Councillor Van Hazinga had proposed on behalf of Councillor Zarella to change it from planning board to N. So basically any multifamily housing development, and actually I'm going to propose a change real quick, not to confuse anyone, but you all just agreed yesterday to change it to multifamily development. It would not be allowed except by a variance from the ZBA if this change were to be made. And I don't know if it's helpful to look at the RB district to give you an idea of what districts we're talking about.
Yeah, can I?
Please.
Yeah, please.
Just one moment. I have my screen share or paused. I'm pulling it up as we speak.
Just to be clear, multifamily is not defined up to 8, it's just a bit or more. There's
Right.
just different criteria once it gets above 8.
Thank you, Ms. Karen.
Okay, so
Oh, yeah. We've got the Notre Dame area where the school is. There's a lot of, that's RB.
Yes.
That's very highly developed area.
so I'm
It's
trying to, it should load up in just a moment. You can see the areas in kind of, I don't know what color to call that.
Peach.
Thank you. I'm a bit colorblind. So some areas sort of close to the John Fitch corridor between sort of Lunenburg Street and Water Street. Some sections of the Claiborne neighborhood, some sections south of, in the South Street neighborhood as suggested, and some up closer to the college, kind of pulling up Mechanic Street here. So that's a sense of some of the properties you'd be looking at here.
I guess the question would be, is there different characteristics you see in RB versus like RA is pretty much is like single family, and RB is 2-family by right, and then you can do 3-family by special permit. And now presently you can do multifamily housing of any number in RB similar to RC. So is there some type of distinguished piece between the two where you have 1, 2, and 3 families in RB and then a 7-unit or mixed in.
Right, and I think that was sort of the,
Kind of,
I can't speak for Councilor Zarella, but I think that was sort of the crux of it is as you work out from the center of the city where you get more dense, maybe this is a transitional moment, perhaps.
Being
yeah,
it's
quality between of life or anything between different types of property uses or similar, like you just mentioned, like emanating from the center outwards.
Yeah, like RA makes sense to not allow it as it's mostly single family, but RB and is still fairly dense. So allowing it by special permit by the planning board, I think I think I would be in favor of that.
So it would be a case by case though,
That's
correct?
right.
Correct. So the
All
same criteria that we looked at before, that's the criteria the planning board or the ZBA would need to look at for any project to determine that it fits within the character of the neighborhood.
Okay. Now, I could vote either way on this.
Well, so if we don't do anything, is that still hold true? Because as Council Fleming said, she can go either way on this. So if we don't do anything, is that still the case? That
So it was sent to our board with the planning board's recommendations, which was to allow it with the special permit from the planning board.
right?
I put forward the counselor, amendment to that, at the request of Councilor Zarella that he will also make a similar amendment in the legislative affairs meeting to change that to no. So what we should decide is, are we going to adopt that change or not adopt that change?
The RB
Councilor Zarella is requesting that we do not allow the planning board to have that permit review.
Correct.
That it would be up to 3 units in the RB.
the
or
RB
a variance for more than 3 units by ZBA.
runs all behind FSU. There's kind of a bunch of dorms behind FSU off of Highland Ave, and that's RB district in the proposed zoning map. And right now I think there's multiple dorms, so that would be multifamily that would no longer be even allowed. The proposal.
So I guess one question is multifamily use even before this, these proposed changes? What is the current status?
The current status would be, I believe, planning board. I can certainly look it up right now to confirm. And I'm guessing that
Yes.
Mike O'Hara is going to beat me to it, or Paula.
It is planning board presently.
Okay.
If no action, it's no change, it's still by planning board.
So this would be changing the current status quo.
Yes.
Change it to no.
Yes, the change to no would be a change from the current status quo. Okay.
And so there'll be no reviews, nothing. It'll just be allowed by right. The two
No.
family.
I'm sorry, Councilor Di Natale?
There'd be no risk. There'd be no reviews at all. It'd just be allowed by right. The two family.
The two family is, yes, two family and RB is allowed by right.
Right.
Currently, multifamily and 3 family are both special permit.
Currently.
Currently in the RB.
Okay.
So this would be the one
Councilor
element.
Zarella wants to remove the planning board review for multifamily as well.
Yes, so it would just be not allowed except with a variance from the Board of Appeals.
I don't know how we can justify that with the density of these districts. I mean, then we're getting into the whole matter of parking and the thickly settled nature of these areas. To me, it doesn't hurt to warrant a review. I mean, I feel like if we don't have these reviews, it sounds like we have to review everything, but this allows people too that are in those neighborhoods to know what's going on and provide public input as to their feelings on it, as opposed to if this is just allowed by right, no one's going to know anything.
I think I would clarify, the issue is not whether or not it should be allowed by right or a special permit. The issue is whether or not to be allowed by special permit or not allowed.
Okay, so
It's,
Council Zarella proposing would mean that they don't need a special permit.
It would be that it's not allowed.
this would be,
Oh, it's not allowed, period.
Yeah,
it's
Not
hard
allowed,
to see
period.
with track changes on, but now you can see this is how it would look. Multifamily development in the RB district would be an N.
I believe you're still paused, your screen, Tom.
Oh, sorry about
Okay,
that.
so he's proposing we don't even allow it in the RBs.
Correct.
Right.
And by going with that, you would still need a special permit or you wouldn't need anything then. It goes up to two-story and that's it?
So you would be able to do a single family or a 2-family by right, which
By
is
right,
same as it is now.
yep,
You could do a 3-family with a special permit, same as it is now.
yep,
Right now, multifamily is allowed with a special permit, but the proposal is to change that to not allowed at all.
not allowed at all.
So any new proposal or a proposal with a property that's been vacant or abandoned for more than 2 years, it loses its grandfather protection. So if it is multifamily development, those would be the 2 cases you might see it in all likelihood.
So how would, okay.
We
That's a tough one because I understand why he's probably doing this, because then maybe they're trying to lessen the density of these lots and these properties, because there's already parking issues in Ward 4 and 5 because of the university, as an example. I don't know. I mean, 3-family, I mean, that's a tough one.
I'll propose we not accept that amendment and keep it to the planning board.
I'll take the step of seconding that.
I would go along with that. Again, I mean, if there is going to be a review, if we don't go with what Council Zarella is proposing, then the concerns that I have will be ironed out in those reviews. Kind of similar to what we talked about earlier. I guess I don't, if there's too many reviews going forward, I mean, these are essential to understand whether these things are feasible or not. If we just don't allow it at all, you know, that's an open and shut case. If we have to leave the door open for this, at least to be reviewed, if the planning board deems that it's not necessary or it's not feasible, given the density or given the hurdles that may come of it, then yeah, I would be opposed to just striking it entirely. Let's just let it be reviewed. If it's not warranted, if it's not good, then it won't happen.
Okay. So does anyone oppose to removing the amendment and keeping it as a special permit? All right, so we'll not complete that change and we'll keep it as is.
Okay.
The commercial recreation single family dwelling, that was changed to a no earlier.
Exactly why we should do them all together. Thank you for the reminder. Okay, so then up next we have artist live workspaces, just an addition. So we have a separate provision that we haven't touched at all with our zoning rewrite, which is our smart growth district. That had a definition for artist live work space developments. We took that definition out. That definition only applied to that one district. By adding it here, it could apply across the board. So the definition would be a building or any portion thereof containing units used by the occupant for both residential use and artist studio space. And then added as an accessory use associated to it, if you had a retail sale on site, it would not take place more than 20 hours per week, and that would be an allowable accessory use. And this would be allowed in RC, downtown, neighborhood business district, and the commercial district, as well as the adaptive industrial district. And then there is a proposed amendment here to clarify that this definition does not include adult entertainment. And one suggestion that I had received from BSC, our zoning consultant, is that there is a definition for a nude model studio and a series of adult entertainment definitions within our current zoning ordinance. And between the two of them, when the building commissioner makes a zoning determination, the more restrictive of the two definitions applies. And in this case, you know, an adult use would apply under one of the adult entertainment use definitions more likely than it would apply here. That was what we heard from our consultant at BSC, but I think it's a legitimate concern. And I guess I'll leave that up for debate.
I'm sorry. So if an artist had a nude model come in and artists stood around and sketched the nude model, would that be not allowed or allowed if there was the adult proposal? I don't understand what you said.
It would, in that instance, the more restrictive definition, which would be a nude model studio, would apply. So it wouldn't be considered an artist live work. It would be considered a nude model studio, and as such would be restricted by the definition of adult use in our zoning, which is basically by the city council in the commercial and industrial districts.
What if it was just a, like, for example, I took, architecture class, and, we had to do a nude model, class of 3 months or whatever. But that wasn't the primary purpose of the artist studio. It was just something that happened over the course of a week or two. Is it the primary use thing?
I should clarify the definition further. So I will just let you all read the definition of a nude model studio. And I think this might be what Councilor Zarella is getting at when he's suggesting we should make sure a artist live workspace is not an adult use. The definition is here.
I did put forward the amendment after conversations with Councilor Zarella. I do think it may be a little more concern that is necessary for this use. I think we do have some safeguards and considerations to avoid a adult use sort of trying to back in as an artist studio. But I think it's also important to reflect that an artist studio may use a nude model, but I think the definition that Tom just put up really points towards intent, and I think it sort of covers it. I don't think there's anything wrong with sketching a nude model. That's been part of art for centuries. But if you're using that as an excuse to have a nightclub, then that's a problem. But I don't think it's something we really need to get too worried about in the definition of artist live workspace. I think it's pretty clear the difference. So it was raised as a concern. I don't know that we really have to change anything.
But the proposal, to Tom's concern, would be that it would revert to the adult use. So
I think it's important to note that the note on the use table, that comment there, was really just a point of discussion. There's no actual change proposed specifically at this time.
Okay.
It's just really, that was just a discussion point attached to the end of the new definition of artist live workspace, or was it artist studio? I forget. I don't have it.
Artist live workspace.
Artist live workspace. So there's no actual change. It was just something that was raised as a concern that was added here as a discussion point.
I have a question on the RB district for artist live work. Why not allow it by planning board? That's another. It's still a pretty dense district with a lot of large buildings and some older buildings. Promoting artist live work space, like could be three floors, and the bottom floor is where they have their studio, and they live on the upper floors. I don't know why we wouldn't want a planning board to at least allow that or disallow that in certain circumstances.
Sure. And one of the things that came out of our advisory committee, originally RB and RC were like functionally identical in our ordinance. We considered merging it. and they had suggested maybe we start to encourage more dense uses within the RC and do the flip side of that in the RB district. And the one thing I would say about the RB district is a little bit dense, and as we go through the use table, there are a few commercial uses that do apply in RC, but not RB. And in some respects, artist live work would be a commercial use in that you would be allowed to sell for up to 20 hours a week on site. And of course, you're performing, various artist work, whether it's a painting or a sculpture, whatever it is artists do. So I think that's the distinction there. That's worth noting. I think it's a consideration to be made, just like the discussion we had about multifamily development.
I think that's an area I could go either way. I think I see the arguments on both sides. I don't know what Councilors Fleming or D'Antalli think.
I mean, if it's occasional, if it's just someone's doing it randomly, I don't find it to be a problem.
This would be whether or not we want the planning board to have the discretion to allow a project to occur or not have it allowed at all.
I think it is worth noting that, Fitchburg has been trying to brand itself as the gateway to arts and culture. Should we be a little more permissive to this use? I think it does still require planning board approval. So if it's an artist use that may be loud or disruptive to adjacent property uses, maybe if it involved welding or sculpture or something like that, it's something that could be considered if it would not be appropriate for a certain site in RB. But I think it's fine. Let's give some more flexibility. I'm getting convinced.
Yeah, it's trying to differentiate a little bit between still RB and RC. That's RB is still kind of more residential. And when you look at the zoning map, it was recommended to rezone some more areas, neighborhood business district, to give more prevalence to that retail business / residential pieces of it. So really to try to take this and, trying to fit it, is try to take the parcels and try to fit it versus vice versa and say, oh, this can just go anywhere. It's like really trying to hey, would be appropriate for this area for these types of zones. So really looking at the parcels that way versus trying to fit it in the other way.
But I do think it's important to consider that this is work that's done in someone's home. It's live workspace. So it's something that you don't necessarily need a commercial building or anything like that. You just have an apartment with a studio in it or a house with a studio in it. So yep. I don't know that you necessarily need to differentiate for the sake of differentiating.
Unless there's advertising, correct? So
that would be something that would be covered by the sign ordinance.
Right.
And the planning board.
And right, because that's a great
mixed use question, because then it's what use is it? Because the signs are now by what the use is, not by the district.
Right. Now, but if it were planning board special permit, in every instance, the planning board could place conditions on any special permit that they grant, as opposed to if there's a by right use and somebody wants to open up a shop, they don't necessarily always have to go through the planning board first to get those special approvals.
So a scenario, someone has a studio in their home, but they have it out, let's say on, a website that they're looking for nude models for, for art, for paintings. How does that work into this?
Good.
Because you don't have people just randomly showing up to be,
Right. And certainly in some cases where I think the other difference between like an artist live workspace and just artistry as a home occupation is that this would allow for people to sell for 20 hours a week goods on site. And, certainly and anyone step in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you could have a home occupation to be a painter currently, where you just have a small studio in your house. You're not selling any of your goods on site. It's just sort of taking place in a single family home. So the same principle could apply today with a home occupation where you could sort of advertise it accordingly.
Okay, thank you. That is an important distinction, I think.
So
And
the planning board, it wouldn't make sense to have it in a dense neighborhood in RB, but maybe in some of the RB areas that have some commercial elements, maybe they would allow it. That would be their kind of, they would be able to allow that?
We've been looking at trying to take any with commercial elements and really maybe recategorize them to neighborhood business district or downtown business district or
so
commercial or.
For example, the planning board had suggested making the Notre Dame school the neighborhood business district instead of RB. So the planning board did propose a couple changes to recategorize RB districts as MBD if we felt like it's something where commercial use might take place.
I would like to note that Ms. Bohart had a pretty relevant comment that, in these days, more and more artists, like everybody else, sells their goods over the internet remotely and ships it rather than having the traditional gallery model where people come in and look at stuff. Would that something that would require a live workspace, or could someone working out of their home as a home occupation ship and sell those?
That would be a home occupation.
Okay.
And again, anyone else feel free to step in and contradict me, but the distinction between a home occupation and another form of commercial use is there are no externalities to it. You don't bring anyone into your property, and in the case of actually, all you're doing is going to UPS, bringing your packages and shipping them out, right? Or having a UPS drop where they come by and pick up your items. You're not bringing in, large quantities of clients to come visit your place of business, which would be more like an artist live workspace. So I think Mary Jo's right that the bulk of artist live workspaces would probably just be home occupations. This is more of a niche use that we're going to see at the Fitchburg arts community, and it may be rare instances elsewhere, but it is a pretty rare use in the grand scheme of things.
For home occupation, you can't allow any customers to come to your home for home occupation.
Correct.
So if we did have, if you had your home occupation artist space, you wouldn't be able to have people come into your studio.
Correct. So that's the distinction here. If you were artist live work, you wouldn't be a home occupation. You would have to get special permit to do otherwise. And I know Paula had noted a question about what signage regulations would pertain to this. It would be, we separated our signage by residential uses and non-residential uses. So all of the same criteria that would apply to any residential use for signage that you all viewed yesterday would apply to artist live work.
Would it depend on the sign? If the sign is for the address or the resident, that would be a residential sign, but if it's for a business, would it fall under the commercial restriction or the need for a permit?
My understanding is the distinctions drawn from a residential use as classified in our table.
Okay.
So by putting it here, we would lump it into that category.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was confused thinking is a principal use versus accessory use. So when something actually turned into an artist live workspace from residential, right? Is that how is it?
So
is that?
I think the definition itself would be a residential use were it housed within the use category of residential. As
right.
No, I was just trying to, like, what prevents someone from residential doing an artist studio now?
well, they can't have the accessory use of selling art.
Right, already. Like the garage or,
But so
I
that
just, why have the principal use, right? I was just trying to,
All right, so I think we should come to a decision and move on. We have talked about it a great deal, and I think it's warranted it. So I guess, should we keep it a not allowed use or allow it with a special permit? What do people think?
Allowed with a special permit.
I agree. I would move that we change it to allow with planning board approval.
Okay, I will as well. Let's do that. So heading.
Paula Karen's fine either way.
the next proposed amendment was to move family daycare home large from exempt uses to C7. And it essentially, the change is being proposed because all these other things are exempt uses. In other words, we can't prevent them through our use table. Family daycares are not. I think it was lumped here because it's right below family daycare small, but a large family home daycare is not an exempt use. So that's, in my view, more of a formatting change than a substantive one.
Okay.
And here's where we get to the definition of agriculture. And in our last meeting, we looked at that whole house definition of agriculture to say that this is agriculture. A farm enterprise is something that does agriculture, and a farm enterprise is something that can do agro-tourism, agro-commercial, and we listed all the other things that are not necessarily exempt agricultural activities. But if our definition and the section that we approved basically stated that if your primary use is agriculture, you're allowed to do other agriculture adjacent activities, basically. So one thing that was sort of an unintended consequence of our meeting is we took a definition of agriculture exempt that was set out in Mass General Law, and we started to change the definition on the fly. If you recall, we talked about, should there be horses? What do we do with poultry? This, that, and the other thing.
Bearing animals.
We have no bearing on changing the definition of what exempt agriculture is per Mass General Law.
Wow.
So essentially, we would, and the suggestion from our city solicitor and our building commissioner would be to have two separate definitions: agriculture exempt, and it's further down, but I think it's worth noting, agriculture use non-exempt, and basically have one reference exactly the definition in the Mass General Law, and then one reference the same, except to say it's not that. That's basically all it is. So we're saying there are some things that the Mass General Law exempts, there are some things that it doesn't. It doesn't change any of the other decisions of substance we made in the second bundle. We still, the changes in bundle 3 said, if your primary use is exempt, you can still do other things, in essence. So that's the gist of it there.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
And then this one follows with the definition of agriculture non-exempt. Proposed amendment number 5 is to remove the hyphen from non-exempt container farming. So it'd be container farming, non-exempt, one word.
Non-exempt, one word.
Yeah, like we have up here, non-exempt, the language would just mirror. So it would read the same in line 1 and 1A. Just a consistency sort of formatting piece.
Hmm. Okay. Looks like no hyphen is common.
Right. Oh, well, that's good. Then we're not voting on changing anything. Okay. Another proposed amendment was to change golf course from to no in the RA district. Currently, it's by planning board. And again, RA is like a step before rural residential, which is the most rural district in the city. RA district is kind of like the suburban residential districts, and this would just prohibit any future golf course from taking place there. I think Oak Hill is zoned RA today. Doesn't change
it's-
anything about Oak Hill.
I believe it's rural residential, actually.
I stand corrected. So I think it's probably unlikely that we have golf courses in the future, but this would prohibit it from being in our suburban districts.
Okay. Could you scroll? I saw a motor vehicle change in downtown business.
Right. And in all of the other instances, it's kind of confusing because all the changes are red. This was a planning board change, and thank you for noting it. They had recommended it go from BA to N in the downtown business district. And there was a lot of discussion, and I think the board could have gone either way on this, ultimately decided for the more restrictive no. And, again, things like viola would still be allowed because they're pre-existing non-conforming use. This would really refer to any new, oh, I'm sorry, this is sales to begin with. So I need to stop using the viola example.
Well, the one right below it is also a no.
Right, thank you. So anything new would not be allowed in the downtown district that is either motor vehicle sales or repair.
Tom, I think we had talked about that and said to leave it alone as VA
For repair.
for repair for number 12.
Right. And actually, that might be why I'm thinking about viola, because that was
Because we talked about that, viola and Montoris, and it's like, is it something you want to see in the DBD district? But then it's like, well, these are there, and are they appropriate?
right.
You want to have.
So, oh, sorry. So my mistake, the N should not be there.
Okay, good.
I had a couple of comments on 11, 12, and 13 in this particular area about the motor vehicles. On the sales on number 11, should it be by Board of Appeals? At least, is it Board of Appeals or by yes?
Do you mean
across? They're all BA, so I'm not sure why underneath the commercial district. So 11's commercial.
It's yeah.
But right now, so why can't it be? I guess why are we changing it to planning board from Y? Because that would be like, that's like Colonial West. Like, so we would have no by right sales anywhere in the city.
Right.
So should it still say Y? Should it still say yes?
That was not a planning board decision?
About switching it to plan. I don't even know why it says PB, because everything's by BA for motor vehicle.
Except for
the AI district, right?
I will say that if we're going to allow motor vehicle sales in the city, the commercial district is where we would like to have them. And this is the area along John Fitch Highway. I mean, it was formerly titled the Commercial and Automotive sector.
Right, in the Wayland Street corridor as well, South Street. So I tend to agree. I agree with Miss Karen's recommendation.
It's presently a Y, so it's
a change.
So just leave it as Y.
On that note, why is artisan food and beverage over 7,500 square feet the only one here that's planning board? We're allowing artisan manufacturing over 7,500 with a Y. Why not artisan food and beverage?
It's subject to change. If you felt differently, I'm not sure I have a good reason why it would be planning board here, and I think it should be consistent across the board, frankly. And I'd have to double check there, but I actually thought this was planning board as well. The thought process being that larger developments of, over 7,500 square feet, and again, River Sticks and the new brewery off of South Street. No, off of Lunenburg Street. Both
Summer
of
Street.
You were right, Summer Street.
Okay, I gotta trust my gut. But both of those are under 7,500 square feet. So I think the original thought process was the larger ones would just require more review by the planning board as opposed to being allowed by right.
It's commercial, it's a manufacturing versus like a commercial use in the commercial district. Where it's yes by right and industrial use, but when you're getting over that large, then it becomes, when does it become more of an industrial use than a commercial use?
And so it just gives the planning board discretion to make that determination.
I'm fine either way. Just they should be
Consistent.
consistent.
I think it doesn't hurt for those larger developments to have an added layer of review just due to their size. With these, if they have like a brew pub or customers coming over a certain size, then there's more and more people coming and going. I think it makes sense. So I do think it makes sense to be consistent. So I would advocate for having planning board approval for both of those over 7,500 square feet.
Okay.
One number before you leave the page, number 13, NBD. 13, motor vehicle service station or car wash.
In NB.
NBD, it says no. Should that be by Board of Appeals? Similar to the above and below uses, is you're going to be allowing a motor vehicle dispensing station, but then you can't have a car wash potentially. I mean, it's kind of like a combo thing in some cases.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
And it just kind of corresponds with all the motor vehicle uses of Board of Appeals in those districts.
Yep, I'm fine with that. I do think before we leave this page too, if we can go back, because there was a change with nursing homes, Ms. Karen pointed out.
Not allowed in what?
So presently nursing homes are allowed across the board with planning board approval. One of the recommendations put forward by Councilor Zarella that I have proposed on his behalf is to make it not allowed in the CR section. Is that?
I actually thought it was a different section.
I thought so too. Let me check the notes.
I might not have caught that one.
Under CR change Y.
It doesn't make sense to put it in commercial recreation, right?
I mean, I agree. And we're not going to see it as a practical matter.
Yeah.
Was that RA though?
That is,
You know, I thought it was RA too. Maybe
it's in commercial use. And
D7, change PB to N in RA.
Okay.
That's the
So-
proposal.
I may have mixed up those notes, I guess.
I also may have. So in any event.
Yeah, because right now we have like the Caldwell home, which is right near downtown. That's that's proposed to be RB. So that would still be allowed by planning board. RA, removing it from RA.
Maybe
don't
the
know.
question could be, is it large enough that nursing home here is underneath commercial uses versus a residential use? However, do you potentially have larger homes or spaces to use, but then it's a commercial use and more of a residential area? So is that why the proposed for no?
Yes, I did get clarification. The proposal was to make it no in RA. And I think that was the intent, that it's a more suburban neighborhood. Ironically, it would still be allowed in rural residential, and we presently have at least one nursing home in a rural residential area.
And perhaps that was the thought, and maybe there isn't one in RA. So again, maybe it's best to talk over with Councilor Zarella at Legislative Affairs, the rationale.
I would say we keep it planning board across the board, except for commercial recreation, as shown here.
I don't have a problem with that. I
'Cause
think
we are getting older, and things may change in the near future, our needs.
you know, as that gray tidal wave comes hitting, and we may gonna need more nursing homes, so
Right,
why limit ourselves?
yes.
Is anyone opposed to keeping that planning board approval? All right. That was.
You just went by commercial recreation. It says PB and no. Am I reading this? I have a hard time seeing this.
Yep. No, thank you for asking. Okay,
Okay.
so I'm going to look at it with no markup so we can see what it would look like. And commercial recreation would be planning board in the rural residential. That was a change that was voted on in phase 1. So that's already, I mean, obviously you can change it, but yes in downtown, yes in neighborhood business, planning board in commercial recreation, planning board in industrial. Nothing should be just a yes in adaptive industrial. So
Yeah, when it's in red, it's difficult to see.
no, thank
Sorry,
you.
old eyes.
And we could also,
What is commercial recreation in this definition?
we can shift right to the definition and
I think while you're doing that, Tom, I just will make a quick note. It is 7 o'clock now, and the Legislative Affairs meeting is scheduled to start now. We are going to continue until we finish the items that we need to address. The Legislative Affairs meeting will meet right after us, and they will be much quicker because we'll have a lot of this discussion out of the budget.
so indoor and outdoor facilities operated such as a business and open to the public as facilities for ice skating, roller skating, racket sports, bowling, horseback riding, swimming, miniature golf, and outdoor and open air live theater.
Now, I thought in the rural residential, I thought we voted it to be no, because we didn't want to see happen what happened in West Fitchburg. Did I miss something?
In Game On, you mean?
Yes, Game On, yeah.
Right. So
Because there were 2 zones, 2 areas. Just
right. So Game On was permitted through an overlay, but conceivably you could perhaps see that fit here in the definition, to your point. What I will note that, you know, this discussion all began to change the zoning from the Economic Development Strategic Plan. And this was one of the goal items from the plan, because we do have a lot of sort of rural areas where we might be able to see something happen like horseback riding or sort of that type of recreational activity. And it was discussed at the Economic Development Strategic Planning meetings that we should leverage that sort of rural heritage as a potential economic driver and a driver for tourism. I'm just giving you the rationale. I think you bring up some legitimate concerns, however.
And I think it is important to note that the largest tracts of land in our city are currently in the rural residential area. So that a lot of these uses take a lot of space. So if they're going to be feasible in the city, this would be one of the prime areas where they could happen.
I guess then it makes it not rural residential when you start putting large facilities in, which is what happened. So, okay.
It's a valid It's a valid concern, Counselor. And another thing we mentioned in the strategic planning was to create a fine distinction between our urban and rural areas. And I think our mission statement was to have a dense urban amenities, and I know I'm paraphrasing here, with the picturesque rural backdrop, and that was sort of the core of the plan. So I agree that one could make the argument that having more of these type of uses in rural residential could take away from that character. So I think it's a valid debate to have, although I do think it's the only place in the city we might see further extensions of this use. Not the only, but one of the key places.
I'm fine with leaving it planning board. I'm generally lean towards being permissive for allowing the planning board to make that decision.
Yeah, I would agree. I would like to leave that flexibility for the city. I do think that is an opportunity for our city to grow and attract development, and I don't think we should be too restrictive. I think that is an opportunity that we should keep available.
All right, keep going.
All right, I was just waiting for the okay. And
What was that from a CC from no?
that'd be adult use. Oh, thank you. So downtown business, one of the other things in our plan was to make our downtown more family friendly. I think if we were to agree to that definition, we wouldn't want to see adult use taking place there. And this isn't adult use cannabis. This is adult use in the more explicit sense, I guess you would say.
So adult use would be allowed in industrial and commercial, but not in the downtown.
Correct. The thought being those are both the uses, those are both districts where one could drive in and out, whereas a downtown environment, you're trying to kind of create a walkable environment. So if you're going to be downtown, you're more likely to confront whatever uses are in that stretch.
I don't know. There's a lot of clubs in Boston that are all walking distance. I'd be very surprised if the city council voted in favor of allowing an adult use club downtown. But if 10 years from now downtown is crazy hopping, I don't know. Maybe that might be a development that someone might want to propose, and maybe the city council would want to be able to vote on it. I don't know.
Are you proposing to change it?
Personally, I like the change in keeping it no, and I think the best area for this would be commercial and industrial.
Okay.
I think we want to encourage downtown development to include a lot of residential uses to get people down there, and I think this kind of makes that harder if this type of establishment is there.
They're no longer adult use in Boston's walkable downtown areas. Oh, okay. All right.
No, I in the process of appraising a building right off the common that is adjacent to two gentlemen's clubs. I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Okay. Well, we're not Boston yet.
I'm not aware of the existence of any gentlemen's clubs in the Boston area, so I won't comment.
Are you pleading ignorance, Tom?
Just adding some levity to the situation. Okay, so moving on.
Why are there dots for wireless communications, or stars, but the yeses for the wireless communication concealed?
That happened before my time. I think it was, so see section 181.6.2. We can certainly, oh, I'm sorry, I was not paused to begin with. But if you see here, it says C 181.6.2, we can certainly go there to check it out if you'd like.
No, I'm good.
I think we still have, a whole other meeting after this, if we could just keep going.
Yep.
All right. All righty, and then there was a change made from the planning board to actually, before I get there, artist studio space. The definition, again, this is just a studio, not a artist live work, also taken from our 40R district. And this is just a space used for the creation, production, rehearsal, or teaching of any visual art or craft, etc. And assuring that the requirements, everything takes place within the building. There's no offensive things taking place outside of the building.
And that is planning board and RB, like what we changed for artist live work or didn't change. So
Correct.
I like that.
That's true. That's a good point. It's consistent.
Yep.
Then industrial uses, because we had now created earth removal as its own distinct use in the ordinance, these two are now separated: earth removal and timber harvesting.
So the question there too is, it was previously combined, earth removal and timber harvesting, all by planning board. And I think you just were recommending on the earth removal, it switched to planning board from I guess earth removal stays with planning board, which would be different from here. But there was also suggestion from the planning board, right? It was across all districts. So there's a proposal here to put no in some districts. So just for your consideration, if you wanted to see it across the board and or
in
just
the
no.
rural residential, that was where the amendment was posed. Do we want to just say no?
Right.
There's a large swath of area in rural residential where I could see that there would be more earth removed than a basement and a whatever. So I would say that should be planning board also, right?
I think the board had proposed to this committee that either it would be a consideration to be made.
I think it is important to consider what earth removal is like, and it is it can be loud. It involves lots of large equipment, lots of large trucks. That this may be something that is best suited for an industrial area that's not near homes.
The definition in earth removal was something like if you're moving for a basement, it was 1.5 times a house basement, something like that. Right?
1.5 times the footprint of the building.
Well,
That was not associated with a permit. Anything with a permit doesn't fall underneath earth removal. So if you're building a subdivision or a house, a road, a septic system, it doesn't. It's more, as it was explained to me by the building commissioner, it was more of a business.
yes, so this would be the principal use of the property.
Right.
It's not earth removal in order to build something else.
Right. So it
This
could be
is-
long-term.
Yeah, this is earth removal as an enterprise, as the
Right.
principal use.
So we don't want that in rural residential.
It is allowed today. We have, and I think the board is giving this choice because we've seen a couple examples of it where I think we maybe regret it. Paula, Karen, would that be?
Oh, I'll just
fair
say
to say?
challenging. We may be seeing more like, say, RA or RB, where there may be some, very large hills, but there is some dense residential around it. So it's like, certainly as someone's developing like a building or a structure, could be fine because there's a end to it, solar field, something, but as an ongoing project or enterprise in a residential area can be challenging, just say. Whether or not that's really appropriate as a use in those areas, though they may actually have, sandy hills.
Yep, I'm fine with no for all the residential.
Including rural.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the question was on rural, because we're like, it is a large swath, could be away from people, large properties to be able to do some activity out there. We don't probably have some very larger, inner city, probably not going to see it happen on small parcels, but
Apply to the zoning board.
So is that the committee's decision then? Shall I continue?
I'm fine with that. Or if people felt strongly about Board of Appeals, that'd be okay. But I think let's keep it now if no one else feels otherwise.
So manufacturing, is that planning board or is that changed to no? In that neighborhood business?
Thank you. So that's a proposed amendment in the downtown business district to change it from planning board to no. And that was one of the joint Councilor Zarella, Councilor Van Hesinga on behalf of Councilor Zarella amendments.
And this is manufacturing. We have artisan, we have light, and then manufacturing. This would be much larger scale manufacturing.
Right, like Simon Saw, DRS kind of thing.
DRS is AI, I think. Or I.
Correct. I was speaking more of the use than the district. Although DRS feels like it's downtown, it's historically zoned industrial and AI in this case.
So what about the select engineering manufacturing that currently exists in the downtown? Would that not be allowed if they were to build that today with this change?
It's hard to say because I'm not the zoning determination officer as to whether that would be manufacturing or light manufacturing. But we can certainly look at the definition to view the distinctions between the two. It's not a super heavy lift. So light manufacturing, as defined, the production, fabrication, processing, or assembly in a manner that is in compliance with all state and federal rules, confines, et cetera, to the premises and is not hazardous to abutters because of a potential fire, explosion, or radiation. Manufacturing might, include those sort of more hazardous. It doesn't include that sort of prohibition that it can't be hazardous to abutters.
So I think in the example of the select engineering property, it is contained in the building. So my feeling would be it would qualify as light industrial. One point to notice is that Mary Jo had mentioned this, that select engineering has been the source of conflicts with the budding commercial condos. So there has been some conflict there. And I know Councilor Boschman has mentioned that to me, that he's gotten complaints or noticed himself that you can hear noise. But it is also a pre-existing property that this wouldn't change its ability to continue to operate at this location.
And I would say, the 166 Boulder Drive, the old GE factory, Sawyer Passway where Micron is, those are things we think of as downtown, but they're not in the downtown business district. They would be proposed to be in AI. And likewise with the old mills on Broad Street, that whole district is AI, it's not downtown. So this would primarily apply to the new construction of manufacturing within the downtown. And given the definition is probably unlikely, I think you could make the argument that you afford the board the discretion, but there's a good case to be made that it is a use that could be hazardous to abutters in the downtown.
All right, would anyone like to propose a change, or should we move on to the next item?
Okay.
All right, let's keep going.
And then this last one, that wasn't a change. That was something already approved. It was just not added from phase one. And so that's it. One thing I would say is, Councilor Squally, I think you had suggested going through the AI, a couple
Yeah.
uses in particular, and we didn't get a chance to do that. So I
Yeah,
didn't know if you still had those questions.
There. I don't know where AI is on your.
It's here. Am I?
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So let's see. Here's my questions. Why not allow lodging house by planning board approval in an AI version? And why not allow motor vehicle storage like we discussed in AI? Why not allow a medical clinic or treatment facility by planning board? And why is mobile food operations just a straight yes in AI and not by planning board?
Okay. So I'm going to try to take those as I heard them, starting with the lodging house. So, it ultimately, a lodging or a boarding house, the question with the AI is we're either faced with the choice to allow a property to continue to have an industrial use, or we are using AI to encourage uses we think would aid in our kind of economic competitiveness, if you will. And so it's just a question, I guess, for the committee as to whether that's a use we want to encourage with this incentive. And I think previous discussions, whether the planning board or the advisory committee, the thought was that perhaps this isn't something we want to incentivize for that use to take place.
No, and I think it's not a use that we should ban entirely, but I think it works best in the areas surrounding the college and the RC or the really dense residential areas. I think that's the best place for it. And I would advocate keeping it as proposed and not allowing it in AI.
Okay.
And then the next use,
Motor vehicle storage.
motor vehicle storage. Could you give me a citation, please, so I can just get to it quickly?
181.689.
I guess like D1 or D2.
I don't know.
Would that fall under warehouse?
It was in the original table that we discussed in the AI district.
Okay.
It specifically called it out in the board in the chart
Okay.
as motor vehicle.
I'm sure I can just. Are we seeing
I
it?
think it's 11, Tom. Motor vehicle equipment sales, including off-site vehicle storage.
All right. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mike. So it's PB here.
Oh, okay, because
Right. So this is the board, the planning board, when they made their recommendations, they were looking at this. They weren't looking at, they did the same thing that you all did, essentially. And that's one of the changes they proposed.
okay, that's great. What about medical clinic or treatment facility? Because there was a medical office is allowed. There's medical office is
Right.
allowed, or is planning board, but
Right.
a medical treatment center or facility or clinic is not by planning board, just not allowed.
Correct. But once again, it would be allowed by a special permit from the Board of Appeals, because a property that's AI could choose to utilize the I designation if they chose. So
Shouldn't it be, shouldn't the N be a BA then?
well, it's a BA here. So if you look at the footnote for AI, says
Right.
that.
That you can revert to I?
Right. So basically that just means they can do it here. Anything utilizing the adaptive industrial designation would be through the planning board strictly. The planning board would be the body governing that incentive. And the way it's best thought of is it's an incentive that is something we're using to encourage adaptive uses that sort of enhance our economic flexibility. Because ultimately what we're saying is we have these old industrial properties, we have these brownfield sites that, are large open swaths of land. We can either have them be industrial, or we can have them be something that, we're going to use this district AI to incentivize sort of new and sort of progressive economic competitive uses, if that
Okay.
makes.
So the last one is just mobile food operations. That was a straight yes, whereas everything else seemed to be planning board.
Okay.
So here we go.
Oh, there we are. Yeah, so that it should just be a planning board. And actually the same goes for a farmer's market. Nothing should be allowed by right in the AI district because theoretically you would use the industrial designation.
Okay, that's all my questions.
All right, does anyone else have any questions or concerns with the use table that we should address? All right, I would entertain a motion to approve the table of principal uses as amended.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is
I
anyone
wanna-
opposed?
I'm opposed to one
Okay,
section, the commercial recreational use
all right,
of
so
the
we'll
planning board.
take that separately then.
Okay.
With the exception of line 20, is that correct?
Lot 20, yes, in the. What
Yeah,
section is
I
that?
would say D20.
D20. So does anyone have any opposition to any of the changes with the exception of line D20?
No.
All right, so we'll approve all but D20.
Move to approve D20.
All right, so D20 is, okay. Do I have a second? Well, for the sake of having a vote, I will second the motion. Is there, so do understand his opposition, so we'll take a roll call vote. Councillor Fleming,
No.
Councillor Squalia,
Aye.
yes. Councillor Di Natale,
No.
and I will be a yes. I do believe we have, we do have a tie. Councillor Zarella, I believe you're in attendance. As your function of the parliamentarian, could you please remind us how we proceed in the event of a tie?
Certainly, a tie basically means the motion fails. It doesn't necessarily mean that the opposite of the motion is enacted. In a situation where there must be a decision, there really isn't a procedure for a tie. Usually you would want a tiebreaker. I can offer that either it could simply be left to legislative affairs, or no, that doesn't work.
Well, I believe.
Yeah, I think it may need to be left for legislative affairs.
I believe the action is to change the existing. So if the motion fails to change the existing stays. Is that?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay.
The
So
existing is planning board or no?
The
Yep.
existing is planning board, and Councillor Squalia, what was your motion to keep it planning board?
Yeah, so I guess.
If the motion fails, then it's still planning board.
Yeah.
Well, my motion was to put no. That, correct.
yep. So Councillor Fleming is making a motion to change D20 in RR to no. Is there a second for that?
It's presently no.
Let's take a look.
It was no, and I think you were trying to change it to
Yeah,
plan.
I'm getting, did someone change it? Or,
You know, because it's not a, is it a line that's allowed right now?
See, that's why I asked, it says PB and N,
All right,
if
let's
you're
clear
looking
it.
at it. So we want, so I didn't know if it was being changed to planning board, or because you have both there and then you put it up, and then you
Okay.
said it was gonna be planning board.
All right, so with
So Ms. Karen is correct. It is presently no, so it will stay no.
Okay.
And it did go back and forth a little bit with our proposed changes. I think that's the confusion. But with the exception of that, we do have other changes in that line?
It was, no.
So Ms. Karen, you don't believe that the planning board voted to change that to PB?
Well, I'm just saying what it is in the present table, not that we vote, what do we vote it to be?
Okay.
I'm just saying the principal use table at this moment in the ordinance is N. That's all.
In the existing ordinance, but
In the existing ordinance is N,
as
not,
you all are reviewing it, the planning board's recommendation was to change it to planning
yes,
board.
yep, so then you voted on it, or can vote on it, which way you like to go.
So I believe still in the circumstance, our vote is to make the changes proposed by the planning board. So I think it still qualifies as a change.
That would be correct.
Yes.
So is it gonna, maybe I'm confused then.
So so it's going to stay as no because the motion to change it to planning board failed.
Okay,
We do have other changes, I believe, in this line.
So
right, okay.
I think the committee is acting on the planning board's recommendations. So
Other than the one that we just discussed.
Right,
correct.
So Council Fleming's objection, and I seconded it, was to, I believe, and I'm not speaking for her, but we're okay with all the other planning board recommendations for that row, except for the RR district.
Right. So my question would be if this were to be, if it were a tie and the motion didn't carry, I'm unsure of what, does it go back to the planning board's recommendation, which is everything else, or does it go back to the existing?
My understanding is it would fall under what it is existing, because we're getting a recommendation from the planning board that we haven't voted on yet. So if we don't approve of the planning board's recommendation, it would revert back to what is existing.
That is correct.
I would concur with Councilor Diatali as well. All right. So is there any opposition to the other changes proposed for that line?
No.
All right, so we'll keep those. So
we're set with this, right?
yeah, if you just give me 1 second to just make sure I have some good notes on this. Keep track of.
I'm sorry to make it confusing. I just didn't quite understand what was happening. There's a lot
No,
of there.
I honestly don't know how you do this. This is like stenographer, this is like advanced stenographer course, you know what I mean? I don't know how you're keeping track of this stuff.
All right.
Some days better than others.
Yeah.
So I
see
think
red lines every now and then for no reason.
so. I think we're all set with the table of uses.
Okay.
Is it just the zoning map left, or what else do we have?
It's just the zoning map left.
All right, let's do it.
All righty. And I am going to be reviewing the zoning map as amended by the planning board.
All right.
Okay.
And I am just waiting for it all to load up.
And I will remind anybody tuning in that the Legislative Affairs meeting will be taking place 5 minutes after the conclusion of this meeting. It will discuss the same subject matter, but it should move a little quicker based on previous meetings.
Sorry, guys. It should just take a moment to load up.
No problem. I found this one has a lot of data on it. It takes a while to get going.
It worked. It worked fine by myself. I'm going to try turning off my video for a minute and seeing if that might help. Maybe it will move things quicker. I don't quite know. But
I'll zoom in and out a little bit, just a little. It seems to refresh it.
Okay. Oh, and you know what? Here we are. I had it already loaded up. I thought I did. All right. So I guess before we look at this, I one really important note looking at the existing zoning map. If I could just toggle it off for a moment. Everything you see here is blue, starting from the, boy, it's getting late, Great Wolf, and heading northeast through kind of the Princeton Road, Westminster Street, River Street corridor. This all currently today is industrial. And this was one of the big changes that was proposed by the board, was that, and by the advisory committee before that, is we should look along that corridor and see which of those uses are still strictly industrial, and in which case they would retain the I designation, might be industrial, but also could be something else, in which case we'd switch them to AI, or it might be more appropriately a neighborhood business district. The area around the British American Club would be a great example. That's not an industrial property or a district. That's a neighborhood district. It's a business district serving a neighborhood. And are there other areas where it might be more appropriately commercial? And in some very rare instances, this is existing. I think that might be the confusion, Councillor Squalia. I'm just showing what's there today.
Okay.
Now, there were a few rare instances as well where things were zoned industrial that were proposed to change to residential, and I'll explain why. And I think the board, the committee would understand the rationale. So one thing I can do as we're reviewing here is I can make this somewhat transparent so we could see the parcels below. What I would ask of the committee here for your opinion, if you think it's easier, we could review it with satellite imagery so you could actually see the properties that we're looking at, or we could go back to the traditional street map and then you could see what the streets are. I don't know if you all have a preference either way. I was going to proceed like this unless I was told otherwise.
I'm looking at satellite on my computer, so either way.
Does anyone else have a preference?
Either way.
Okay, we'll go to imagery with labels then, which I think will still include some of the street names. And we can always toggle back and forth. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I'll keep the legend up here for us to take a look at. Originally, it was proposed to rezone the area around Great Wolf as commercial. The planning board proposed adding it to the commercial recreation district, which again would be along with the Game On Fitchburg site, which I guess the committee sort of approved already in concept. Then we had an area off of 5th Mass Turnpike that currently is zoned light industrial. We're actually proposing to remove that designation entirely. But if you really look at it, there's a bunch of single family homes here. It's really more accurately a rural residential district. And then you have a Unitil sort of generator here. But you have this big wetland and you have a lot of single family homes. We're not going to see industrial development take place there. So the recommendation was made to shift that to rural residential. And then going further up, this whole area, which, you know, is the Greif paper mill, as well as the City of Fitchburg owned Lagoon site and a Georgia Pacific site that we would hope to one day turn into a substantial development. We have proposed adaptive industrial because I think we'd like the flexibility. For example, one of the things in a development proposal created when we did a study on these parcels, these two together are over almost 100 acres, and there's a proposal for a technology park. A technology park would be better served, permitted through adaptive industrial than industrial because it's not an industrial use. But maybe something industrial would take place there, so we wanted to keep the flexibility open. Going further, the mill number 1 site is adaptive industrial. It today already is in the mill conversion overlay, so that's really no change there. The wastewater treatment plant, the former West plant, would be proposed AI. Again, it could be industrial or adaptive industrial. It would be the choice of the city were we to dispose of that property. but it provides with added flexibility. Then you had a couple parcels here that originally were proposed neighborhood business district. I think one is Luck, and the other, I can actually click right on the site for more information. And anyone else on the call, feel free to jump in if they want to help me out. There's a lot of properties we're looking at here, so sometimes my head's spinning a little bit as we're reviewing.
Okay, so
I think, Tom, the southern one, the planning board recommended to just absorb back to the AI because that didn't make any sense.
Right. So I'm agreeing with that recommendation. I'm just giving context to the group as to what
happened with it. Got it.
Right.
So that property is the New England Keyboard building right now?
Right. So it seems appropriate to keep it the same.
AI.
It is presently in industrial use. I believe they make signs there.
Here we are. I fixed it. And you guys can all do this as we're talking here. Not giving it a ton of it, but it presently is an industrial use, and we would want to keep that flexibility there.
To AI.
Correct. This is a parking lot for Luck, or I'm sorry, this is a parking lot for Luck. This is, you know, a neighborhood business as opposed to residential use. Yeah. So both of these were proposed to change to neighborhood business district.
Yeah, that's good. And the Luck building across the street, that's an old, isn't that I think that's an old mill. So having that AI seems
correct. And it actually today is in the mill conversion overlay. So it would be good for them to have that additional flexibility.
Yep.
This is really just a railroad right away, but it doesn't have a functional change one way or another. Then we have a series of mill buildings that are currently in the mill conversion overlay district. We just changed it to the adaptive industrial district.
I think just a second, Tom, if we go back to that area you were just talking about, the railroad right of way, what about those parcels at the bottom of the hill to the right of the railroad overlay? Is there like a transmission line easement right there? Is that site?
That's that would be Unitil. Yeah, it's like a Unitil easement site.
Okay, that's fine then.
Okay. So yeah, no development can take place there one way or another. This is the central steam plant site. It would be adaptive industrial. And I'm looking at the map, not you all, so feel free to jump in if you have any questions along the way. Now, as we are getting closer to sort of more neighborhood business uses, we have the old O'Recordy that's proposed to change to neighborhood business district. And actually not proposed by the planning board. This is what we had proposed originally. So I'm just kind of talking through some of what we've done here.
And changing along River Street there, when it gets to Wallace Road, changing that to commercial, that makes sense.
Right. And so this area was once, just for one moment before we get there, this area was all industrial. Now it's changed to neighborhood business district. This is the area right around Simon's Road. It is, the British American Club and that whole little sort of commercial corridor. And then we have the Baltic Lane Mill facility that would stay AI. But now to your point, we can go further up.
Before you move, Tom, there was going to be some change on near the British American going up Sanborn. Those houses across the street. Right.
You talking about here?
Lower. See the purple on Sanborn Street to the left, to the west? Yeah, those were supposed to go over back to residential.
These two?
No, left.
Left.
Oh, these.
Yeah,
okay.
those, and then as well as the properties up above on Sanborn, because they're like half residential, half.
So basically, these and these is what you're.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So just cover that
property
residential
line.
zone to clean it up. Right.
I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm going to change the color there, and you'll know why later. Let's go yellow.
Yeah, it might be the one above that too. Yeah.
Thanks for being patient, everyone.
No, at least you have the polygon to work.
And so that would be changed to RB, which is similar to the areas around it.
Yeah. Good.
And then similarly, we have some neighborhood business district areas here along as we start to approach sort of the River Street, Wallace Road area. Then we have a shift to commercial in a few properties. So, you know, as we approach here, you know, this is that doesn't quite seem right to me.
So just on the corner of Oak Hill and River, there, you know, there's that, I don't know if it's an old mill building. It feels like it. The one that used to have the antique store. I forget the name.
Yeah, Homestead Primitives.
That one.
Mhm.
That
408.
like an AI, but all the rest along the front, facing River Street, seems like changing to commercial would be good. But what about that one, a Homestead Primitives building? Would that be more
Is that-
appropriate to be AI?
I believe that's right here. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, but I believe it is a commercial building. It's not a mill building or an industrial building.
It may have been once in a, you know, back in the day.
And when you
Maybe-
walk in, it feels old and
No.
I don't know.
The map's not turning on, so you can't see the designation right now. But the planning board had suggested changing all of this. It looks sloppy the way that it's drawn,
Yeah.
but essentially this whole corridor changing to commercial. And that was a planning board recommendation. And that includes the 50/50 diner, that includes Homestead Primitives, and really everything up to the Rotary there.
It was previously industrial. It makes makes it a lot easier for people to do retail and actually other businesses. Otherwise, they need a special permit or dispensation for doing everything.
Right.
Okay. Commercial then.
And then one proposal here, we have the former Star Storage Building.
Yeah.
And that I think is today it's zoned commercial and automotive. And we'd like to rezone it to adaptive industrial. It's an old mill building. It needs that flexibility. And that's something we've heard from the property owners. It's certainly consistent with the district as we've designated it, which is designated to create flexibility for old industrial buildings that need reuse.
Okay.
And then basically along the River Street corridor on the northwest side, all of the properties that are not mill buildings in this corridor, we have designated neighborhood business district on the northwest side. On the southeast side, designating them commercial. So that's the former Voyatzi's Plaza here. And, you know, stretching all the way down to some car sales lots. And then, of course, neighborhood business district, that's where we have Dario's. That's where we have a dry cleaners here. And sort of, these are uses that service the neighborhood. These are uses that you're more likely to drive in and out of, is sort of the distinction between the two. And then all the other properties around them would receive the adaptive industrial designation. Currently, they're industrial. So again, they get those rights, but they get other flexibility too. And then moving further, we have all the Broad Street mills. Most of them still would receive adaptive.
I'm sorry, Tom. Could we go back to the left a little bit?
Yep.
I just want to draw attention a little farther left. There's that Okay, a little farther there, you had highlighted a parcel, is that neighborhood business sort of by itself?
Here?
Yep.
Yeah, I believe that's not the dry cleaner. The dry cleaner is in the commercial district across the river.
Used car lot. Yeah.
That's presently a used car lot.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Murphy.
Thank you
Which-
for catching that.
Which it presently is not an allowed use in the neighborhood business. I forget with our edited or our new table of uses, how would that align?
Right now, it's the guy who's selling like mopeds or small motorcycle type items that he went before the public safety committee recently.
And currently that would be an N in neighborhood business, which doesn't mean he can't do what he's doing. It just
Oh,
means that if it ever were to become abandoned or, vacant for 2+ years, it would lose that grandfathered status and it would have to do something else.
So the car's repair building and auto sales, they wouldn't allow that. That's not allowed use for neighborhood business district.
It is.
Repair would be by Board of Appeals. I thought you were saying sales.
Yeah, well, he does repair and sales. That was the
Okay,
That's-
in that case, if his principal use is repair, it would be Board of Appeals. If his principal use is sales, it would be no.
I believe repair is not allowed in neighborhood business either.
Currently, but the use
it
table
is
that you just voted on, a planning board recommendation was to change it to Board of Appeals.
All right, great, perfect.
And it's also 4,000 square feet. We talk about the sales of the 10,000, just
Yep.
FYI.
Right.
Okay,
Very good point.
I'm fine. And we can keep it as proposed. I just, it occurred to me, so I wanted to talk about it a little more. Thank you.
Understood. Okay. And then we have a planning board proposal where we've got some strips of land currently that are in this area. They are zoned or proposed to be zoned RC. And this is an auto repair and garage and then a vacant piece of land. It was a suggestion to zone it MBD. So it could basically, a business district to serve the neighborhood. And likewise for the gas station across the street and the plots of vacant land beside them. As opposed to being industrial, zoning them neighborhood business district would mean that you get a use that would be more likely to be compatible with the neighborhood around it.
looks good to me.
And then going further down the map, we have a couple. This is 166 Boulder Drive. In the downtown business district is as drawn. One addition by the planning board was to add the upper common. Corresponds with our farmers market discussion the other day. The only thing it would really do, aside from allowing farmers markets to take place at the upper common, it would just create a sense of consistency. And we all understand that the upper common's downtown. It's just consistency for the map more than anything. Obviously, we're not going to see a lot of uses taking place there. And then another proposal you have up here in along the Elm Street neighborhood, you have currently a neighborhood business district that the planning board had proposed to change to RC. The thought process being, and we can certainly take a look at the properties, that you have a daycare facility, you have, a
Former
repair
Dan
shop,
Paving.
right? And you've got a lot of sort of legacy uses there, but it's really within a neighborhood, and you also do have a lot of
Yeah,
of
Looking-
homes as well.
looking at the map, this area was my only concern with planning board changes, because there's that water, fire, mold area. There's another, the daycare use. There's another couple of buildings that look like, like auto. Well, is that? Oh yeah.
And that is the one parcel that kind of fronts on Mechanic.
Yeah. So I don't want to. I don't see why we would be changing this back to RC. This feels like a businessy area. I mean, maybe the extent of it are extending up to those two parcels where New View Communities built those 3 houses. Maybe the extent is too high or too far north, but encompassing, maybe if you just took out those 4 parcels at the top.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
I think it's actually the other way, that this used to be more of a business district, but it has over time begun to transition to residential use. So I think once that paving company is out of there, it's probably not going to be another commercial use. It's more likely to be a residential use with the rest of the neighborhood. So I like the change to RC. I think that works. And I think it should be really consistent with the area around it. The existing uses can continue, but I think once they stop, it will continue to transition to a residential or completely residential area.
Well, there's a couple of buildings there on the south side, that are industrial uses now. So if, like, for example, the water fire mold people were to leave that building and, 6 months or whatever were to go by, then now that building would no longer be, that would become vacant.
Yeah, it would be 2 years before they would lose their grandfathered status. And that is one of the more viable buildings because it's a newer building, but there are a lot of older garage type buildings that really, once they're done actively being used for their current uses, will probably be torn down and redeveloped.
The idea was, and I talked with North of Elm, initiative, that this was converting more over to that single family. So you see more of that investment in the residential on that street. I did ask one of the principals about what did they see when they're coming up from the art museum going up Elm Street, what it is that they look, type to see. And it would be more residential versus I understand the industrial, like the contractor yard on the left. But in with our current zoning change to 5,000 square feet, those can just be even single family by right lots now. So there's definitely a future use potential, but you see the investment going up that corridor. The only businesses further beyond that to the north are the daycare, and you see that variety store piece of it. So I mean, if you wanted to keep those, but probably like those 3, you have variety store to the corner, make for NBD.
I think that makes sense. I think that's a good compromise. And Michael here did point out that the Dan's Paving did move out. Is that actively being used, or is it just vacant now?
No, it's vacant. They've been marketing that for years.
311 Elm Street. Which one is that on this map? Because I know that one is currently being used by a business. Looks like it's right on the corner of Sari Parkway.
That might 311.
Yeah, that was the over paving yard. Yep.
Yeah, so that's water fire mold, right in the corner of Elm Street. And that's an active business right now. I don't know if they own the building. RPM.
And it can be they own the lot across the street too. I mean, right on the same side of the street, lower, so they own both lots. Yeah. But it's like in the future, what do you see there? But it's also zoned. It will be zoned to allow some residential homes to be built there once that use is passed, to be more in keeping with that and establishment of that neighborhood.
And just to clarify, something can lose its grandfathered status either by being vacant for 2 or more years or by being abandoned. And one definition of abandonment is foreclosure. So there could be an instance where a property is foreclosed upon and then is immediately deemed abandoned and lose its grandfather protection.
I would add now that underneath neighborhood business district, a contractor's yard is not allowed.
Right.
Even anyway.
Right.
It's more an industrial use. So.
Right. I'm just more clarifying the comment. I think the general sentiment of what's been said here and keeping it to these 3 parcels, I think would be a good compromise in my personal professional.
I would support that.
Okay. I just don't want to see buildings just sit there vacant because they can't develop them. It's my only concern.
Is there a motion one way or another?
I would make a motion to alter the proposed changes to the map as Tom discussed.
Second.
Is there anybody in opposition? All right, let's do it. Is it the change to NB or to keep it NB?
Well, I don't know how to call it because you're changing the planning board's recommendation.
Okay, yep, all right. Doesn't matter. We got it.
All right.
As long as you can keep track.
I think I do. Okay, the property that is being permitted as university apartments, it received its special permit already, so it's kind of a moot point. By adding it here to the downtown business district would just be, I think, more consistent with, it's a downtown property. It's an acre that's about to be built, 112 units of housing. It's a downtown property. I think we would all recognize it as such. So that was the thought process there. And then the parcel south of the Boulder Drive, Putnam Street area, basically from Putnam to the Water Street Bridge, would be zoned downtown business as opposed to what they are today, industrial. So we have 3 vacant lots and we have violas. And again, we just made the committee just made the decision that violas would still be an allowed use in the downtown. So it doesn't affect them, but what it would affect and perhaps allow for development on the uses to the south, which aren't going to be industrial. I think we could all agree.
What are the vacant lots?
Right. So this is the parking lot that has always been associated with shacks.
Yep.
Here. And then these 2 parking lots are the ones that have always been associated with Santander. And before that, the whatever bank was there. And now are ones people often use to go to Strong Style Coffee or Eddie's Music or Mill Street.
Those are the vacant lots you're referring to?
Yep. And then just for reference, this is Riverfront Park. So those are the lots right across the street, across the river.
Looks good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then,
changes at the bottom of Laurel.
did I? Oh,
Oh,
right.
yeah.
No, you're right. So this would be Zetas and the car sales, proposed change from industrial to MBD.
What is that building that's right below that empty lot that we tore down, that building on the corner? What's the building right below that, or south of that anyway?
Are you referring to this
Yep, lower than that.
here?
Yeah, that.
I believe that's a vacant lot as well. And I was going to get there in a moment because that's actually a different distinction. But one of the changes was to propose to make that MBD. Again, that's Zetas and car sales lots. Then here we have a bunch of vacant property that's currently zoned industrial and is being used as sort of a contractor's yard. And I think that's a fine interim use, but perhaps in the future, this area might want some flexibility. So we had proposed zoning it adaptive industrial, and the planning board had proposed taking these 2 properties here, the vacant lot right on the corner of South Street and the vacant lot that's a former demo right behind it. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Paula, this is one where there wasn't. Here?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have to remind me what the decision was made.
Yeah, it was the NBD for those 2, and we have the AI behind it. So the idea was, since we spent the money and took the building down at the corner, what is it that we want to see as the main avenue getting to downtown and for the city? So what do you envision seeing on that corner? It's probably not a contractor's yard. So something retail or something oriented. So that's why the proposed change to NBD for the corner.
And then
the AI behind that was to not just straight industrial, but the AI allows flexibility for something else.
So it doesn't take any rights away from the property owners in this district. It just adds more flexibility should they choose to take advantage of the AI.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. Then we have along the Summer Street corridor, you have a couple historic single-family houses that, because they're right next to Micron, they're zoned industrial today. And the board had proposed changing that to RC. And then we have a series of properties along Summer Street that are currently zoned MBD, starting with the North Central Mass Association of Realtors building, and then heading up to this whole Summer Street office development. And these are all buildings that are more commercial in character. And I'm just kind of pulling up some photos as we go in case you need to see them. 76 Summer.
The
Thanks
assisted
for
living further up.
right. So the thought was to change all of that to neighborhood business district, with the exception of these parcels here, which are residential, and having that remain RB.
So what about across the street? There's a funeral home that's currently in the RC here.
You'll have to orient me.
It's a little bit further up or further to the south, Tom, I think.
To
Yeah.
the south. Okay.
Mhm.
You're talking here.
That's
no,
St.
it's
Bernard's, across the street from that and back a little ways.
Yes.
It's on the corner of one of those streets, I think.
It's back up farther north, opposite the,
Right across the street from the assisted living, right? So that a little north of that,
right
that
there.
one, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so the
Uh,
question is, when you see the abandoned, is it, when it stops being used as that, what is the more appropriate use of it? Do you want to be retail, or do we envision it being back to some type of residential use on that side of the street? That's the kind of like the,
And here are the kind of houses around it. You've got more kind of residential, historic homes. So this is one sort of distinction among them, but it's a large, sizable parcel.
Yeah, lots of parking, and it's right across the street from the nursing home. So I mean, I don't know, it makes sense for it to be commercial for me. It has been for a long time.
I'm not sure I disagree with you there. And it's right across from a large, hopefully to be zoned neighborhood business district. So it would be consistent, I would say.
You might not want to be right across the street from the assisted living facility. I would think that we'd want that to also be neighborhood business district, to allow any future owners to continue that use or adjust the use in that big commercial facility.
so funeral home is allowed by special permit in RB and RC, and allowed by right in downtown business, neighborhood business, and commercial.
Right. I think Councilor Squally might have been suggesting if there was another type of commercial use we'd like to see there.
Like, if it wasn't the funeral parlor, right, then it would be, right, something other type of retail. Retail takes precedence in NBD type of thing over residential.
Right.
You could correlate
Lot of
that to across the street.
I think it's it's the funeral home, so it's something that could go either way. It could revert to a residential use. I mean, there's a partial home, people live there.
Could be a rest home or whatever.
Yeah, or it could go to could be an office or something like that, or the site could be cleared and redeveloped. It decides, I could go either way.
Okay. Is there a motion one way or another?
For consistency, if the planning board feels it's good like this, I'm fine with keeping it.
Yeah, we can go either way. It's okay.
Okay. Hearing no motion, I will continue my journey southeast. A couple other recommendations made by the planning board. I'll get to South Street in a minute. We'll kind of stick along the Water Summer Street corridors. The old Wachusett chip factory was limited industrial. Now it's AI. And there was a suggestion. This is the plaza where La Reina is. It's where Fun Stuff Party Place is. This is the Salvation Army. And they had proposed going from AI back to neighborhood business district, which is probably more appropriate given the uses that take place there. As opposed to the factory itself would keep that designation AI.
Yeah, the only concern I had there was the cleaning up of the AI. It looked like it takes the backyards of two houses on the top left.
Right. So that's kind of how the district was drawn before. Oh,
Yeah.
do you just mean that line?
No, the two lots north, how
Oh,
the grid goes into the backs of those two lots. It just.
Right. And that was just following when it was LI, it was drawn to that line. But I certainly could see the reason why you would want to make that adjustment.
Yeah, are those sections part of the lots going to the west?
No, they're fronting Krisiak, so they are residential.
Okay, yeah, so
There's
I
really
can make them
no-
consistent with the houses, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
All right.
the same to the south when you scroll down a little bit.
I'll fix it later. Don't mind my misspelling.
Clean that up. Oh, that was cleaned up. Okay, so well,
I'm just waiting for it to load right now. Yeah, so that cleanup was made.
Yeah, it looks like it's good.
yeah, that shouldn't be pink there, right? That should be back to the residential districts that it's.
You mean here?
Yeah, there. Yep.
Isn't that the
two houses?
where the old Kentucky Fried Chicken was?
That's
yeah, one
here.
on the corner. So, but just
So
that.
here's a home on Krisiak. That was a plan.
Oh, okay.
This is a planning board recommendation that didn't make its way through.
That looks good.
I'm saying make R consistent with that district behind it, which I believe is RA. You know what? Why am I trying not to be right at the end? I'm not going to stop being precise. All right. Okay. Now, a couple changes proposed by the planning board. I don't think there are any along the John Fitch corridor. It's proposed that that corridor become commercial. This area was already industrial. That would remain. This area was already neighborhood business. That would remain. The planning board had proposed changing this entire area that's currently zoned industrial to neighborhood business district. It's about 80% homes, and then there's a couple commercial properties mixed in. It seems appropriate for it to no longer be industrial, because
Okay.
if you look at the scale, there's nothing industrial that's going to take place here. And corresponding with that, this was a change proposed by Paula, not the board. So I'll let Paula speak on it, but Paula had suggested this entire district change to MBD. It also is proposed industrial.
That's to, at least on the frontage portions of those properties, because the neighborhood business district designation allows that to be growth for retail versus it just strictly being the industrial. So and it's fronting on some main avenues and thoroughways in the city, would encourage more commercial types of development.
And so they're
Spots, you can
they're-
still leave the industrial behind, but
Yeah,
Right.
The auto repair, and then there's the remote control cars.
right.
yeah.
I think
I
that
don't
makes
think
sense.
Warehouse.
That should be part of the commercial corridor, I think.
Okay. And then some changes proposed by the planning board would be to make this corridor commercial. This is, 19 Airport Road. This is no longer sort of industrial. And that makes sense to adjust it accordingly. There's some houses mixed in, but you know, it's largely, again, today it's zoned industrial. This would be to downzone it to commercial. And then neighborhood business right across the street. You have some homes, you see here the former Italian Burger and Butler Furniture. These are neighborhood serving businesses. And then here, proposed to change from industrial to commercial, and looking at the property, I think you all could understand why.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
But what, can we go back to the John Fitch? I liked that idea of making that commercial. That strip, maybe on both sides of John Fitch, the first street fronting properties, like Councilor Van Hazinga suggested.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure where you're talking about.
All right.
I thought you meant where Paula Karen suggested to
Oh, yeah,
change
yeah.
it to
It's
neighborhood.
Bemis.
Pardon?
It's Bemis Road.
Oh, yeah, Bemis. Yeah,
So
maybe.
You
maybe
were
that-
suggesting carrying it all the way to match, basically?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't catch if that was a proposal that had been made.
It's also whether or not you want to change it from NBD to commercial.
Yeah, I'm fine with either way, but Councilor Van Hazinga suggested commercial there, and so
Oh,
that's.
I'm sorry. I was referring to it as a commercial corridor, so I was supporting Ms. Karen's proposal for that is marked on the map currently.
Oh, because it's zoned industrial today, so by zoning it MBD, it would be kind of shifting from industrial to commercial. But specifically, it would be the neighborhood business district designation, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good to me.
Okay. All right.
One of the things we found important, like the Vogue Plaza, is and even on the one where it was like former on Water Street, the thinking discount drugstore areas, is like anybody who wants to go in there to do any type of retail has to go get special permits all the time. So it's really challenging for business development. So if we could zone things more appropriate, that can be more by right for those types of uses versus going in for special permits with the industrial zone, then it could just help eliminate that blockade.
Right.
Step.
Correct. Okay, so one other just important addition worth noting, we added the airport to adaptive industrial, not because we want to see anything happen different at the airport. Obviously, that can't even happen as a practical matter. But when the airport runway extension occurred, some land was freed up for development. And so we wanted to afford some more flexibility for that 40 acres of land to develop according to what the market is calling for. And similarly, there has been discussions of bringing a restaurant to the airport. Adaptive industrial would make that a little bit easier. But we're not touching anything of substance with the airport itself, and it would still retain its existing industrial underlying designation. Okay, now a few changes along the South Street corridor. Before we wrap up, actually, Paula, did I note these changes before? I don't believe I did.
No, there was a couple more along on Depot at the corner, right, when you snuck to like
Okay.
potentially.
So these were a couple areas that today are zoned industrial. But if you notice this whole pink area, we're proposing MBD. And Ms. Karen had just suggested adding these buildings because they are more kind of commercial than industrial in character, or they might just be homes in other instances. But in either case, they're not industrial. So it doesn't seem appropriate to have them zoned industrial.
Can you just orient me, please? Where is that?
Sure, I can back us up a little bit. Water Street, Wanuusnock, Duck Mill Road. So it's kind of like the neighborhood in between. Currently, it's zoned industrial.
Oh, I am looking on South Street.
Yeah, that's where we're about to go.
Looking
But-
more more south on South Street.
Right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
this is how the zoning district looks today. It's all industrial. And then the proposed district would change it to MBD. And then Ms. Karen's proposed additions would add these parcels. So basically everything up to here would go to MBD. Everything from, Duck Mill over would remain industrial.
Oh,
Does-
yeah. Yeah, that
sorry.
makes perfect sense.
Okay. And I believe that's it on that side of town. South Street's really the last bit, and then we'll be wrapped up. So first things first, we have a large chunk of properties along Carriageway Drive that these are all multifamily properties. These are not commercial properties, just as an example. What we're looking at here, these are all large multifamilies. So the thought process here was to change it from the commercial district to the RB district.
In RB, we allow large multifamily by the board.
Correct. And
What's that
that's
on- what's that on the corner there?
it's part of the development. I think it's
Yeah, that.
open space. Yeah. So it's also owned by Carriageway Drive Realty, I believe. We can
Geronimo.
Chartwell Town and Country. Yeah. So by the property owner, DiGeronimo.
Where
but
is this? Does that front a street? It's hard to tell. What
Rodman.
It's beyond the paved portion of the travel portion of Rodman. They proposed an additional apartment building there years ago. It never happened.
And then a few other changes here. We have along Abbott. This is the MART facility. It's pretty significantly sized, and it was suggested to change it to commercial. It's not really a neighborhood serving use. And then these properties here are B because they're homes. They're single family homes. And under the proposed designation, they would be neighborhood business district.
Okay, so just changing the March to commercial there. What about the Salvation Army?
Well,
That's,
it already is neighborhood business district.
right, but if we're changing March to commercial,
Well, I think the thought process there is this is I suppose for consistency, you could make the argument either way because it abuts commercial district. Well, it doesn't anymore. It's really closer to neighborhood business. Maybe that's a more appropriate designation for it. I think
it was proposed as to change it to NBD. It's right now CNA, commercial automotive, but it's a transportation hub. It's the MART, and it's only allowed pretty much in commercial. So it's like whether or not to just keep that as commercial then for that particular type of use. If you change it to NBD, that use is not allowed there.
but Salvation Army is allowed either way.
Yeah.
right.
That's fine.
Okay, so the other one worth noting by the planning board, there's a nail salon or a hair salon here that was proposed changing to MBD right on the corner of Abbott, and that corresponds with it's all commercial. It's pretty logical designation.
Back in sales too, or used to.
Right.
That makes sense.
Okay. Then on South Street, moving further kind of northwest, you've got a couple properties that, and actually, Paula, I'm noting that these are areas that I think you guys also made a distinction on, or maybe not, I'm wrong. So you have a vacant plot of land, and a couple properties. There's a church that could conceivably be a business use in the future, so they're proposed to change to neighborhood business district from residential. from RA. And again, corresponding with kind of the MBD along the rest of that corridor. And then going further down South Street, you've got the greenhouses here that the planning board had suggested zoning to MBD. This is an office development. And then the greenhouses here and across the street, Romano's as well.
Yes.
So
'Cause
basically,
right now it's what is it right now, RA?
correct. It's RA right now.
Yeah.
So this would be a change to zone it for commercial use.
I'm fine with that. That makes sense.
And then here we have an insurance and physician's office proposed to change to RA or
And-
to MBD. Thank you.
That's good. But what about the corner of South and St. Peter there? South and Old South, there's what is that, Pride Auto Body? That's
Are we talking here?
Correct. Mhm.
that should be neighborhood business district also?
We talked about that, and it was whether or not you do include that and or you just let it go. Like it is what it is, and then later on it can still be part of and some type of residential type development, or
Yeah,
keep it as some type of commercial activity or is in that spot. So that's,
Yeah, that's pretty commercial, you know.
well, it is what it is now. What the question is, what do you want it?
Yeah, being right on that intersection.
Right,
I
so yeah, but is it a problem with traffic now with commercial? And then would it retail, if there was a retail shop there, would it be an issue, more of an issue?
I don't think so, because it does have 2 points of access. You can come down to the signalized intersection. Yeah, I would keep that, that parcel and the one behind it. Is that part of it?
Yeah,
Like this?
Yep.
I think it makes sense if we can make those neighborhood business as well. Anybody
Yep.
else have any opinions?
yes, I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm for some future street improvements there to narrow that up. With the entrance onto South Street, though, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and just the type of lot there, it is kind of a prominent spot where it would work well, even if it were to change use to another commercial use. I think it would make sense.
But these are good things to talk about.
I guess it's just NB now.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll fix it later. We get it. All right, and then we get to the Notre Dame School and the associated building beside it proposed to be MBD. Today it's RB. But this would provide more flexibility for other types of development to take place there.
Yeah, and we want that.
And that's all, folks.
All right.
All right, does anybody have any objections to any of these proposed changes that they'd like to consider separately? All right,
Yeah.
I'd entertain a motion to approve the changes to the zoning map as amended.
So moved.
Second,
Second?
and thanks Tom for his hard work.
Yes.
My gosh.
Thank you all for your hard work. I appreciate you
Oh.
sticking with me tonight and throughout.
Everybody here.
Absolutely.
The planning board for meticulously going through this map and everything.
The planning board generally, Paula Karen specifically, certainly Mike O'Hara, Mary Jo, everyone on the advisory committee and so forth. It's been a true team effort.
And quite a process.
Indeed.
There's a lot of clicking, and I think with a lot of those letters and numbers in the table of principal uses, there's some battleships that were sunk. D79.
All right, so we do get to do this all over again in legislative affairs. Is there anything else we should address before we adjourn, Tom?
I need to get a glass of water.
So,
Otherwise I'm okay.
all right, we are going to take a 5-minute break and then legislative affairs will charge up or start up.
Can I just ask, Tom, do you need more than 5 minutes? This is
I'm-
Beth Walsh.
5 minutes is just fine. Thank you for asking.
Okay. All right. 5 minutes it is.
All right.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
Unless there's any opposition, we will adjourn and we will reconvene shortly. Thank you very much.